Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Dana Hall. Morning, morning. I have the pleasure of being the Master of Ceremonies for this year's Bob Brower Memorial Symposium. Many of you were good friends with Bob. I know he was one of my best friends. A staunch public servant, certainly a strong steward of everything about Owasco Lake. And in fact, my professional training is that I'm an aerospace engineer. So I knew nothing about lakes and what goes on underneath and sediment and nutrients and all that. What I profess to know, I largely learned from Bob. I miss him very much. So without further ado, we'll get started this morning. OWL is a volunteer organization. Our focus is to take care of and protect Owasco Lake and its watershed. We are not for profit, and we can always use more arms and legs. So if you would like to get involved, get a hold of us and we'll welcome your participation. So our first presenter is Tony Prestigiacomo. Many of you know Tony. He's a senior research associate at the DEC's Finger Lakes Hub. He's the supervisor of the hub, so that's the local establishment set up by the DEC to focus on our Finger Lakes, particularly the eastern Finger Lakes, several years ago. And so without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Tony.
Good morning. Am I audible to everyone? Okay, good. If you say no, then I know you heard me, so that's the trick. Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here in person, happy to kick off the event. All right, very good. So I'm going to talk generally about these topics for Owasco Lake today. It'll be kind of in the context of data collected in the past, sometimes in the context of data from other Finger Lakes, and sometimes in the context of kind of other issues that we're experiencing throughout New York State. But I saw this type of slide before where you kind of take a minute to introduce yourself to the audience. I know that I know many of you. Some of you might not know me. So who am I? What is my role in all of this? So I grew up and went to college in New York State. I'm originally from Herkimer County, New York, a very small village east of Utica. Like Dana introduced me, I work for the DEC's Finger Lakes Watershed Program. I am the supervisor of that program. I joined the DEC in 2017 from a research nonprofit in the Syracuse area that focused primarily on New York City drinking water reservoir systems, Onondaga County water quality issues like Onondaga Lake and such, and Finger Lakes issues specific or primarily on Cayuga, Skinny Atlas, and Owasco. Since around 2000, 2001. And so this picture is of me as a technician on Cayuga Lake in 2001. I should block out that you probably can't see what t-shirt I'm wearing, but it has a name of a university on it that I probably should mention that I'm not affiliated with, nor did I go to. I don't even know that I got in, but anyways, I visited, so that's why I have the t-shirt on in the program. And I love this picture because it's been 25 years since this photo was taken, and I live in Cortland, New York. I'm married very happily with two teenage daughters, one almost 18, one almost 16, and I like to joke with them that I looked like this until the day they were born, and then instantly like this as soon as they arrived. But no, I'm teasing. They're great kids. So I'm going to take some time and talk about current water quality trends and patterns in Owasco Lake at the long-term monitoring site. Because I think when I say water quality, I need to be careful here about what indicators I'm actually talking about, right? Because water quality means different things for different people. When I say the word, you might think of something, you might think of something different. So I'll be very careful as I go through to make sure that you know I'm talking about nutrients or clarity or chlorophyll or HABs we'll focus on a little later on. And the long-term monitoring site, that's a deep water, open water location, kind of in the middle of the lake at the deepest spot, which is the traditional location where limnologists and scientists collect data to characterize lakes. And so I'll try to be very careful as we go through and stay clear. So looking through water quality for these indicators over the I'll call it the contemporary period, the 2017 to 2024 period in Owasco Lake, you will notice also that the 2024 has an asterisk on it. These are preliminary data, draft data. These data have not been finally quality assured, quality controlled. It's a raw data dump from our lab. I decided to include it to share with you just for context for 2024, because I know 2024 was a particularly challenging year for some issues. And so be aware, those numbers probably will likely change as they get quality controlled. So take it with a grain of salt that these are kind of like the approximate universe of what 2024 was in terms of nutrients, algae, clarity. So we focus on phosphorus in the Finger Lakes freshwater systems mostly because it's an important nutrient that algae and cyanobacteria need to grow and thrive. It is a limiting nutrient is what we term it, which means it is available in the least amount, so adding more is likely to increase things like chlorophyll, cyanobacteria. So total phosphorus levels in Owasco Lake are generally less than 10 micrograms per liter over this contemporary period. I'll talk about what that means in context of other thresholds in a bit. Chlorophyll A levels, that's the green pigment that are in algae, phytoplankton, cyanobacteria that we use to measure as a surrogate of those organisms, are generally at or below the 9-element plan goal for Owasco Lake, summer average of 4 micrograms per liter, okay? Clarity levels is measured by a Secchi disc. Everyone's aware or kind of understands what a Secchi disc is. The light is very difficult to see. People are nodding, so it's a black and white disc. You lower through the water column, and the depth at which it disappears is the clarity depth, right? So the deeper it goes, the clearer the water. Are generally higher, so you can see clearer into the water than in the late 1990s. And NOx, which is nitrate and nitrite combined in Owasco Lake, are generally similar but a little lower now than they were in the late 1990s. And we'll go through what those patterns look like in a bit more detail next. Okay, these are phosphorus trends in Owasco Lake over time. So what I have here is a bar chart of summer average phosphorus for Owasco Lake over a period of years. Now these are non-sequential years, so you'll have to create your own mental gaps in time where they exist, but essentially what we have is data from Jay Bloomfield's Ecology of the Finger Lakes book from the 70s, and then as reported in Cliff Callinan's study in the late 1990s. One was a winter-based measurement, one was a summer-based measurement, so I put them both here just so for clarity. And then there's a period of the late 1980s through the early 1990s, collected through our Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program on Owasco Lake, okay? These green bars are published values in 2 DEC reports, one for the late 1990s and one in the 2004, 2007 range was when the data was collected. The publication was in 2013. And then what we have, 2012 was another CSLAP year, and then 2017 through 2024 is the most contemporary current period that we have through our Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program on Owasco Lake, which we've reinstituted, we've restarted in all of the Finger Lakes since 2017. I'm not going to get into the details of that program, but know that it's a DEC administered and funded program. We rely on trained volunteers. So if the Owasco CSLAP volunteers are in the room, feel free to stand up and take your bow. Thank you very much for your time and efforts to collect those samples. Hey, yeah, great, thank you very much. And all of our CSLAP volunteers across the state. New York, we're very lucky. It's a very water-rich, very lake-rich state. You know, several thousand water bodies at minimum, you know, depending on how big you want to go or how small down you want to go. And the CSLAP program administered by New York State Federation of Lake Associations, I see David in the audience, hundreds and hundreds of lakes, thousands and thousands of samples a year that we get, you know, because of our volunteer partnerships. So we couldn't have these data without those folks. Okay, get to the data, Tony, stop. So if you look at just a general pattern of phosphorus in Owasco Lake, right, you can see that, you know, it's been up and down over the years, maybe somewhat of a high point, 2012, 2017, but then since 2017, you know, generally consistent and generally less than 10 micrograms per liter. Okay, and so why is, I think that line shifted on me, that's supposed to be at the 10. So in New York, we classify phosphorus levels as high, medium, low, based on a scale. It's called the trophic state scale, okay? So anything above 20 micrograms per liter, and that's the New York State guidance value for phosphorus that we use to interpret our narrative standard, is considered eutrophic. Anything between 20 and 10 is mesotrophic, and anything less than 10 is generally considered low levels of phosphorus, oligotrophic, okay? And so we see that the contemporary period, Owasco Lake is kind of at the upper end of that lower nutrient range. This blue chart, this blue graph, I forgot to mention, we didn't have sea-slap phosphorus this year, but we did have a companion study with the USGS on Owasco Lake that year, and that data is from Owasco Lake in 2019, which was not great that we didn't have sea-slap data, but it was nice to have the USGS out there professionally collecting paired data by professionals at a lab, independent from ours, kind of showing the same story as the sea-slap data. So we feel pretty good about these sea-slap results. And again, the take-home, right? 2024's draft. So if they change, you've been warned. All right, so chlorophyll levels. So the green pigment in algae and cyanobacteria that make the water green when those organisms grow, right? Again, same time, same color scheme. Now it's chlorophyll on the y-axis, right? In New York, eutrophic is generally higher than 8. Mesotrophic is between 2 and 8, and less than 2 is generally considered oligotrophic, so very low levels of phytoplankton. And you can see, some years up, some years down. Since 2017, 18, 19, generally stable, generally less than 4 micrograms per liter. Again, this is a good story. Owasco Lake generally, in most places and most times, is not a high production system. So here's a kind of a snapshot take home. How is the lake doing compared to a few different thresholds? 2017 through 2024, summer average chlorophyll for each of the years. The yellow might be hard to see. The yellow is if it was, its summer average was meeting the 9-element plan's goal for Owasco Lake. And so you can see that summer average chlorophyll generally 4-ish or less in 6 of the last 8 years. And that'll be the phosphorus graph, this graph, and the graph before it will be important when we talk about HABs in a little bit. The blue is when the phosphorus was less than 10. 10 is not a water quality standard. It's not a guidance value. It's just how we classify low levels of phosphorus in a general sense. I will make a plug here. I think that the DEC is proposing more stringent phosphorus values for lakes. That public comment period has been extended through March 11th. So if you're interested and want to, please take a look, review, and send your comments in on kind of your thoughts on the phosphorus and chlorophyll values that are being proposed for all lakes in New York, not just for Owasco. Clarity, so measured with the Secchi disc up here. Same general time frame. There are some gaps. I didn't have time to quite fill them all in. The scale is a little different, so it goes from 0 to 5 with 0 up top. So just imagine that this is the lake surface, right? And how deep the bar goes is how clear the lake is in a relative sense. So it's backwards, essentially, right? Reversed. And so you can see from the trophic bars are lined up here, and you can see from the time series, again, some years higher, some years lower, but generally 2017 through 2024, in and around that mesotrophic range, and again, maybe slightly clearer than 20 or 30 years ago. NOx trends, I know nitrogen is an issue people are interested in and concerned with. Looking at the nitrate or NOx, nitrate trends from the 70s. I didn't have time to fill in all of the historical periods, but with our CSLAP data from this period in the late 80s, early 90s to current, a couple high years, generally consistent, maybe slightly lower in the contemporary period as compared to historic. Okay. So that's the introductory part on water quality from a nutrient chlorophyll clarity perspective. And so you're all thinking, that's great, but what about HABs? What about cyanobacteria? What about kind of what we're observing, right, on the shoreline areas and in the open water of Owasco Lake? So, I think that will go away. I think. Yes, perfect. I'll read it quick. So DEC's approach to managing HABs statewide, not just in the Finger Lakes, although my group does focus on that issue in the Finger Lakes region. It's fourfold. It's monitoring and watershed management. Monitoring, we talked about some of the data that we're monitoring. We'll go through some more. Clean water planning is the development of watershed or lake-based plans to come to an understanding of actions that are needed to hit certain standards or goals, right? And strategies that address the long-term, we call it the controllable factor, because we'll go through some of the factors that are contributing to HABs that we don't have much control over at the moment. Funding. New York State has been very active with providing funds for nutrient reduction projects through our grant programs. Two are right here. It's the Water Quality Improvement Program and the Non-Point Source Planning Grant. Those are two grants that the DEC funds and administers, the DEC administers through the state. To date, over $530 million have been made available for nutrient reduction strategies across the state. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific projects that are being done in the Owasco watershed because of these grants. But I will also, when I get there, make sure that I say that the DEC's funding sources for these types of projects is only one of many state agencies, not including local, county, and other programs that are funding watershed improvement, education, outreach to continue to help reduce the loss of sediment and nutrients from the watershed to the lake. We do research. I'm a research scientist. We do research on HABs ecology, ways to prevent and mitigate bloom effects, monitoring techniques. We do have a research guide. It's linked here. If you just Google DEC Research Guide for HABs, you can access and see what that document is. And again, to date, New York State has funded over $14 million in HABs research. And in water body mitigation, in terms of the watershed practices, watershed controls, what can be done in a lake or in a water body directly to kind of intervene, right, if HABs are a particularly challenging year. And we can touch on some of these a little bit, although I don't focus too much time on these. So monitoring, again, we coordinate HABs efforts and reporting for other state agencies like Parks and Department of Health. Everyone in this room is probably familiar with our NIHABs website, where either trained or public users can submit an algal bloom report as they observe them. That goes up to our website. We also coordinate things like public water supply concerns and beach closures with Department of Health in response to or adjacent to bloom reports. So we're constantly communicating with our other state agencies and partners to make sure that everyone is aware when bloom reports come in. I'm not going to talk through each of these. Feel free to take a screenshot of them if you want. The data that I'm talking about or I'm showing, all of these resources are online. Anyone in the public can access any of the data that I'm talking about. The DOW is DEC's Division of Water. That's the acronym. We have a monitoring portal that's just been updated. Contains all of the state's lakes and streams data that we've collected through our state and volunteer programs. So it's all there. The CSLAP site is fantastic. It's a dashboard where you can select on lakes, you can get lake reports, you can get the data directly, you can get summaries and interpretation of what the water quality indicators collected mean for your specific lake and site. Info Locator, that's more of a general GIS-based platform, but you can access things like clean water plans, permits, other environmental things that you're interested in your watershed. Those get uploaded on again, a user-friendly mapping software for you to access. The HABs General website, we'll talk about some of those things, but there's a whole website on the DEC dedicated to HABs and what we're doing about HABs, including research results and, of course, NIHABs. Some Owasco specific and Owasco tangent documents. So the HABs action plan for Owasco Lake, the 9-element plan for Owasco Lake, and the lake model that the DEC funded as an addendum to that 9-element plan are all on the DEC's Clean Water Planning page. It's a lot of pages. You have to want to get through it if you want to read them, but it's all there. It's published, the appendices. It's great information. It's a great amount of effort to understand HABs in general, but then HABs specifically in Owasco. The Advanced Monitoring Pilot. Part of the governor's initiative in 2018, if you recall, was to do a whole bunch of activities related to HABs, summits, and money available through our HABs action planning process for the initial 12 lakes. The other big piece that we did was an advanced monitoring pilot looking at different sensors and techniques on 3 Finger Lakes in partnership with the USGS. I'm going to go through in a bit, but those findings have been turned into a website, all publicly available with the data and the publications and reports. And I don't think I can demo through it live, but I'll let you screenshot it and you can get it. And I put some pamphlets out on the Aula table, the 4-page booklets that you can look through and take home. That I didn't bring nearly enough, but there's a link online where you can print off your own. All right. So, NIHABS reports. Obviously having a reporting system to receive inputs and observations of HABs, we definitely get them, right? People present them in. We have trained volunteers throughout the Finger Lakes. Owasco's program is great. Again, volunteer-based programs that routinely look at and surveil their shoreline and send in conditions to the DEC, either telling us that all's good, everything looks fine, or we're starting to see HABs. And so that system has been in place for multiple years. Aula can chime in, but I think 2018 was the first full year of its inception. And so what we're seeing with NIHABS reports in the Finger Lakes, this is an example screenshot map from 1 week in 2023. So this isn't current. This is just an example of the way it works. But if you go to the NIHABS website, you can see where the blooms are occurring or being reported in the state. You can click on each of the dots. It'll say whether it's old or new, and you can access the reporter and the photographs that accompanied the submission of the report. So again, it's all there for everybody to see. What this table is showing, and I apologize, somehow the transparency got off, but it's every Finger Lake from Canisius in the west to Owasco in the east from 2024. What does the asterisk mean again for 2024? Excellent, excellent, yes. Moving back 8 years through 2017, and what the X means in a subjective way is that we received at least 1 report. So it doesn't mean a lot of reports, doesn't mean few reports. It means at least 1, presence, absence of a report for each of the lakes for those years. So you can see that all of the Finger Lakes for the past 8 years have experienced some level of cyanobacteria and bloom problems. Almost every year, a few maybe not here or there. But for the most part, across the Finger Lakes, regardless of nutrient levels, regardless of whatever, all of your cousin lakes are experience HABs and HABs impacts as well. These yellow highlighted or orange highlighted lakes, the 6, are the 6 Finger Lakes with generally phosphorus levels are less than 10 micrograms per liter. So those of you familiar with kind of Honeoye, Owasco, Canisius, those tend to be higher phosphorus lakes than the rest of the Finger Lakes. But the 6 that have highlighted are also experiencing HAB reports from our volunteer networks. And so some of you have seen this slide, but I think it's important to keep talking about it. Cyanobacteria and cyanobacterial HABs are becoming more and more common across a wider swath of lakes, including low and lower nutrient systems, not just in New York, not just in the Finger Lakes, but across the U.S. and Europe. It's just it's the reality of the times now. And so in 2018, as part of our HABs action plan process, we did a big statewide analysis of all the lakes with observed HABs. I used the collective we. I didn't do the statistics. We hired some consultants to kind of help us work through the modeling and the math. But we came up in New York with 4 factors that were associated with the likelihood of a bloom report. Okay, and those are here. You've seen them, but essentially it's the presence of Dreissenids, and Kim's going to talk more about Dreissenids and what they do for cyanobacteria and lakes moving forward or after me. The length of a lake. So the longer a lake is, the more likely it is to have a cyanobacteria HAB report. The orientation of a lake, so lakes that are orientated in the north-south direction are more likely to have a HAB report. And of course, as phosphorus levels, increase, you get the likelihood of a HAB report increases. All right. So long, skinny lakes that point north and south with mussels. Anyone know of a lake that has that? Okay, all of them do, right? That's the unfortunate situation where we're at. Is 3 of those 4 levels, 3 of those 4 factors, mussels fetch are not, not uncommon to the Finger Lakes, nor have they been, and they're not something that we can really exert a control over. There's other factors too, right? There could be temperature plays, especially in the fall when cyanobacteria are more common. There could be other factors that need a research project to identify. So I don't want to put the list that that's the 4 things, but that's what we found as part of our action planning. This list of papers is not an exhaustive list, but it is a list of papers that talk through cyanobacteria in low nutrient systems and some of the reasons why in different areas of the country and in Europe. So cyanobacteria, those are the organisms in our lakes that we're primarily concerned with harmful algal blooms, right? They're, you know the ecology of it, you've seen that before. But they're organisms that, that exist in freshwater lakes but are more recently becoming more prevalent to where they're forming nuisance and harmful impacts. Cyanobacteria, through the CSLAP program, we collected data on cyanobacteria for a few of the years. This bar chart is showing, box and whisker plots are showing cyanobacteria concentrations as measured through our FluoroProbe instrument. From Canisius in the west all the way to Owasco in the east, again, at our open water location, not on the shorelines, like in the open water where we routinely sample for things, right? This red line is not a standard, but this is our bloom confirmation threshold in New York State. So the skims or the occurrences of which we would confirm a bloom through our NIHAPS program. And you can see that even in the higher cyanobacteria lakes in the Finger Lakes, most of the concentrations, most of the time in the biggest areas of the lake generally are less than 5 or 10 micrograms per liter. So again, that doesn't mean shoreline impacts aren't happening. It just means in the open water, concentrations are low. And so that's consistent with the model. I am really behind, so I'm going to have to move pretty quickly. But that sort of occurrence, right, like low concentrations in the open water and how they can be magnified on a big, long lake because of hydrology and wind to where they're relatively low to where they can be really impactful at a shoreline location is a well-documented occurrence. This is from a book, Ecology of Toxic Cyanobacteria in Water. So this isn't a DEC publication. This is a publication by, folks that have presented this as a mechanism. The advanced monitoring pilot, again, we've been able to publish a lot of those findings. This summary slide tells you what we were able to get out of the project. A big volume of data, a big volume of reports and papers and manuscripts, 1 master's degree thesis, which I'm very proud of. That wasn't mine, but I'm still proud of it. Yeah, go grab it. It gives great summaries, what we did, how we did it, all the data is there. And then I did bring a 4-page handout booklet that you can download the PDF and read that directly as well. So moving on to some research, I'm really excited about this project. My colleague Lou McCaffrey and others at the DEC are investigating very sophisticated ways to identify and quantify cyanobacteria impacts in lakes in New York using satellite technology calibrated and ground truth to measurements in lakes in New York, right? So it's not just what the image is telling us. He's taking the imagery, calibrating it to the measurements that we collect through our lake professional and CSLAP programs. So this is still ongoing, but he's published 1 paper already, and they're working on the second now. And so here's an example of what the technology will let us do. So this is a validation example on Seneca Lake. It takes observations and kind of pairs them up. And the cool thing is that at the end of it, for every image, and there's about an image every 10 days, as long as it's not cloudy, which unfortunately is often, but he can predict phycocyanin concentrations to a 10 meter by 10 meter resolution in all the lakes, many lakes in New York that are big enough, not just Finger Lakes, right? So this will be fantastic to help us quantify, kind of move away from reports to something more systematic and quantifiable so that we know what can is influencing the impacts and when they're occurring across the entire lake surface, not just on a shoreline area. In water body research, we're working at this with other partners. We're on several work groups with federal agencies, with other states, looking at what sort of devices are available on a commercial scale to help impact or treat HABs in lakes, rather than just relying on watershed protection. I'm not going to have too much time. Research is ongoing. Scalability definitely is a problem. Big lakes, it's hard to find a technology that can be applied, at a cost that's reasonable across a 10,000 acre lake like Owasco. Implementation, again, DEC is not the only state agency funding watershed or water quality improvement. Here's a snippet of some of them here, or support agencies. I don't want to say that these folks are all on the hook to provide money, but they provide technical outreach and assistance, including soil and water conservation districts, pro-dairy, and then local appropriations as well. We are lucky to be in the Lake Ontario basin. We do have some Finger Lakes and Lake Ontario specific sources of funding. They're here. I don't have too much more to say other than take advantage of those resources while they exist. I'm not saying that to be pessimistic, but we've been lucky in recent history to have large sources of grant funding to do a whole host of different things in the state. Implemented projects in Owasco Lake, we can talk more about what they look like. I've got a minute, so that's almost right. So, okay, perfect. These are the types of activities that kind of have been happening in Owasco Lake. They've been happening for a long time. They've been happening with local partners, state partners, things like nutrient management, the Owasco Flats project, which another 92 acres. I'm looking at Michelle, right? 92 acres have been added to that complex recently. Land acquisition, cover crops and soil health, all of these things are happening, through various partners, agencies, local collaborators. Upgrades to wastewater treatment plants and facilities, and so we're working at kind of bringing them all into one kind of consolidated pot so we can know. I did have a slide with numbers on it, but then as I kind of think about what those numbers are, it was primarily the DEC's numbers, not Ag and Markets numbers, not DOS numbers, not Environmental Facilities Corps, not Soil and Water Conservation. It's a lot that needs to be considered and kind of pooled together, but just, we and many other great partners are working at this watershed protection issue constantly. And then recent advances and recent gains, we've been very lucky and successful at getting $1.2 million annually to continue to help build and support local capacity in the Finger Lakes at the soil and water district level, to hire staff and provide technical assistance and outreach to a whole host of watershed stakeholders. And so that was announced last year, and we continue to fight for that appropriation every year in the budget. Then, piled on top, it was a good year, busy year last year. We were able to secure $42 million to go to that coalition through the Bond Act and the Clean Water Infrastructure Act to do the projects that we identified in our clean water plans. So our 9-element plans, our TMDLs, et cetera. So we're working through that process. We're trying to build it for the long term. Contracts take time, but we're making solid gains on multiple fronts. And I'm very excited that those sources of funding were made available by the state legislature. Yep. So next steps on HABs, just teamwork, right? Like, it's not one thing. It's not any two things. It's likely lots of different things. And being engaged with the science, understanding kind of nutrient levels, water quality, and the challenges of HABs, regardless of what your water quality status is going to take teamwork and research to figure out kind of more involved solutions. And that's me. I was only about a minute over. That's not too bad. All right, so that's me. Take a photo. Reach out if you have questions. That's my family. We don't live in Owasco, but we take advantage of the Finger Lakes. That's my little nephew from Virginia. That's us kayaking on Cayuga Lake. That's my wife, my oldest and my youngest. That's my oldest, best Instagram pose face. Snapchat face. I don't know. It's whatever. But, anyways. I guess if I have time, I'll take questions. If not, I'll be around and we can chat down the road. So thank you very much. I will have to check and see if I can with the 2024 draft data. That sort of thing requires me to get just permission from my supervision, so I can ask.
Any other questions?
I can't
for
see
Tony?
hands, so
Yeah.
oh, that'll help.
I have a question. I probably don't need a microphone.
I can hear you. I can repeat it too if
You need a microphone for the webinar.
I can repeat it if it's easier. I don't mind repeating it.
So phosphorus levels in recent years appear to be much lower than the 70s and then that high point of 2012. Are we going to get into later the reasons for that?
We can talk after. I won't have time to do that up here, and it would be somewhat speculative. So I don't. We can have a conversation after what I think is happening, but I wouldn't have the exact answer that I would like to kind of put out there publicly.
One more question?
We have a question, or a couple questions, from the online folks. Tom Burke asks, do you use drones to gather water samples and or record HABs from above?
Oh, good question. Everyone heard the question. We don't, as a matter of course, use them to collect samples. We have worked with other agencies that are using, so not just the satellite-based remote sensing, that are using like drone-based imagery. We haven't done it in any sort of official way, but we know that it exists, and we work with the folks that are doing it, just so we can keep apprised of maybe the drone-based technology can give us better coverage during cloudy days, right? Than like the remote sensing from satellite. So good question, but yeah, more to come on that issue.
And an additional question online from Jim Long. Is there any correlation between the total phosphorus levels you showed and the occurrence of HABs?
That's the last one.
And a related question, does variability of TP over the lake's area and data over the summer/fall correlate with HABs?
Ooh, good question. Very briefly, before Dana drags me off the stage. Generally, phosphorus is positively correlated with chlorophyll and cyanobacteria across the Finger Lakes. Other things are less correlated with cyanobacteria and chlorophyll in the Finger Lakes, less pollutants. But we don't see, as an example, in Owasco Lake, a correlation between its summer phosphorus and then the number of HAB reports we get. So there's no correlation between that level in a lake. We can talk about that more offline if you'd like, but that's a good question. In Honey Oil Lake, for example, that has the highest levels of phosphorus. It generally has the highest levels of chlorophyll, and generally the highest levels of cyanobacteria. It doesn't get into the toxicity issue. Honey oil tends to be rather non-toxic compared to some of the lower nutrient Finger Lakes, which is another confounding issue. Okay.
Thank you, Tony.
I have one question here, sir. And I was wondering about, is there much research on the Sucker Brook watershed with regard to the nutrient loading of the north end of the lake where the park exists and two major drinking water supplies occur? And you got the pier that goes out there that traps some of that flow in that area.
Yep, I can say that some of the documents I talked about specifically for Owasco, the 9-element plan and the model, used specific data from a lot of streams across the lake's watershed, including Sucker Brook. So there is information there that we do have. Thank you very much. I'll be around for a bit if there are more questions.
Thank you, Tony. I'd like to introduce our second speaker of the morning. That's Professor Kim Schulz from SUNY ESF. Kim's research efforts focus on the lower levels of the food web, which gets her then involved with the various kinds of mussels. And so she's going to speak to us this morning about apparent relationships between what the mussels are doing on the bottom of the lake and HABs. So, Kim?
Okay, I'm glad to be here. Wow, I can't see anything out there. I was here a while ago just presenting like the results of the survey of mussels on the lake, and I'll include some of that data here so that you can see as much as possible some of these results related to Owasco Lake. But I'm going to sort of talk more generally, since we were focusing on a number of lakes, and I'm summarizing a lot of people's data about the known and sort of likely effects of Dreissenid mussels on HABs in lakes. And a pattern that people have seen widely is that when you get an invasion of mussels, like Tony just said, you often tend to get more HABs occurring. And so we'll talk about some of the factors that might be causing that, and talk sort of generally about the mussels first, and then bring in other factors and tie it together, hopefully. So this picture actually was taken by Tim Snyder on your lake here in a bloom. And he was nice enough to send it to me a long time ago. He was an old ESF alum. And so I just like using that in terms of, oh, sorry, am I not out of, I just like using that when I'm at this lake especially. It's a really vibrant but sort of horrible bloom there right off the top. So I'll talk about a little overview of zebra and quagga mussels. You probably have all seen them. If you haven't, I do have like some shells of them and a little bit of some that were preserved by the DEC in a media. So if you want to be able to tell them apart and you can't, come see me afterward and you can look at those. And then I'll talk about sort of like the likely effects that they're having on the HABs and climate change effects, because it's not enough to sort of talk about just the mussels, but it's a combination of sort of the mussels and climate that are maybe interacting to promote a lot of these blooms that we're seeing. So some factors like nutrient loading and climate. And so then I'll try to bring it all back to the Owasco Lake food web and management. So just a overview. Most of you probably have known, but if you've just noticed, oh, there's lots of shells, you might not have thought about the fact that there's two kinds of invasive mussels in the lakes. Both zebra and quagga mussels are invasive species in North America. They're from this little region that has a circle on it here, the Ponto-Caspian region, and they spread through rivers and when water bodies were connected through Europe, and then made their way in ballast water also across the sea, as many of you know, and then into the Great Lakes, and then into all of our lakes, the Finger Lakes here as well. So there's a wide range of them, and you can see here the graph on the top is for zebra mussels, and on the bottom is for quagga mussels. And here's this year's distribution of quagga and zebra mussels from the IMAP invasives. And you can see here that you have both zebra and quagga mussels widely spread throughout the state, especially as you can see, like generally when we have invasives, they're traveling either on boats, but also you can see through our great system here of canals and so forth, right? You can see where we have the canals going, and then shipping traffic and so forth has led to this spread, and then subsequent spreads to other inland lakes from those sources when people don't wash off their gear and stuff. So there are two different kinds of mussels, like I said, quagga mussels and zebra mussels. Zebra mussels invaded first, and then quagga mussels. Zebra mussels are often smaller. They're generally in a shallower water, as you'll see. They attach to hard surfaces, including plants and rocks, and also native mussels. I'll show a picture about that. So the one on the top here is a zebra, it's a zebra mussel, and one of the ways that you can tell is if it can sit on one of its sides that's flat, that's a good indicator that it's a zebra mussel. And quagga mussels often are larger. They have a more concave, like sort of angular, less angular side, so they can't stand on one side. And they are more common in soft sediment. They actually, it's sort of surprising, they can inhabit soft sediment. They only need something like a very small grain of sand size, was found recently, they don't need anything larger than that, and they can be in quite muddy sediments, as I'll talk about more later. So zebra mussels invaded in the late 80s, so a long time ago. The first record is from Michigan during a routine benthic survey that they were doing in the state. And zebra mussels were actually first reported in this lake. I looked it up before coming back here in 1997. So they've also been here a long time. Like, I'm sure there's a number of people listening to this who were not alive when they got to this lake. So quagga mussels are larger, as I said. They also, as we're going to see, go deeper. They were first found in the Great Lakes in 1991. Quagga mussels were not present in Owasco for a study that Jim Watkins from the Cornell Biological Station did when he looked at mussels and other things in the lake. And he was looking especially, as we'll see in a second, at whether there were effects of mussels on a really important little benthic animal that lives at the bottom of the lake that's an important food for fish, called Diparia. They likely invaded, like I said, in 2016. They also can spread, as many of you probably know, because they have a microscopic stage, which is at the top here. The veliger larvae, they can move around the plankton. They're very small, and they can be transported, again, in ballast water or bilge water vessels, in someone's bait bucket. And so they're easy to spread through the streams and so forth, and that explains a lot of the patterns that you also saw on Tony's slides. So many native unionid mussels were locally the native mussels. So we had native mussels. They were bigger. So the zebra and quagga mussels are pretty small, 1 to 2 centimeters, usually maximum. And the native unionid mussels actually had a real diversity of species in this area, and even more so a little south of New York State. And one of the things that happened pretty quickly after the invasion of zebra mussels, which tend to settle on hard surfaces, is those uniotid native mussels were a hard surface, and they got settled on by those veliger larvae. And so then the mussels, our native mussels, the pearly mussels they called them, people actually, when Europeans came over initially and they found them in rivers, people would actually make buttons and stuff from them. That's part of how they got called pearly mussels, because they have a sort of pearly scent. They really have an interesting life cycle, so if you're interested in that, I can send you a couple cool websites. The first time that I had sampled for mussels on the lake was when people here wanted to know what was going on with the zebra and quagga mussels, and they sort of had us working to help with Upstate Freshwater Institute's 9-element plan that they were doing for the lake model. And so our lab was just out there diving and figuring out what was happening. People also had sampled the lake, as I'll show you again. Jim Watkins and others had sampled to get some grab samples. So if you look at the samples when we went out and did dive surveys, you can see here that the colors are coming out funny on here, but the zebra mussels are here. They're much more abundant near shore, and they're less abundant than the quagga mussels. And the quagga mussels really get abundant when it's pretty deep. So this is meters here. So you're having very few zebra mussels as you are in this deep water, but you get periodically quite a few quagga mussels. And you have overall in the lake, in that survey, many, many more quagga mussels than zebra mussels. So the quagga mussels are super abundant. And we're talking like, if you're looking under a square meter of the sediment, you're finding sometimes up to like 30,000, 25,000 mussels in a square meter. So that's like a lot of mussels put together. This is when Jim Watkins was doing the survey that had been done before for zebra mussels. He was looking to see what the effects were on that invertebrate that was a food for fish, Diparia. And you can see we compared our data to his data the last time I was here. And you can see here that they had a lot lower abundances here than are found here today. So that survey was sort of an order of magnitude less. There were quaggas, there were more overall mussels because of quaggas. The zebra mussels really hadn't changed. The zebra mussels were hanging out near shore. they stayed the same, but the quagga mussel mouths that are all over the bottom of the lake where there's oxygen, those quagga mussels are everywhere on that soft sediment. It's pretty impressive when you're there looking at it. They're very, very abundant at the bottom of the lake. It takes a lot to like sample that thing and haul the mussels back up. So, so there were so many deep mussels. When you're collecting them, you can imagine like having a little square. And in the little square, you're down there and you're grabbing the mussels out, you know, wearing gloves and grabbing the mussels out. And usually what happens is you have a diver at the bottom, and then there's another diver above him who's the safety person, right? It was me and a ESF student, and we would trade places. And so when you're collecting it, a zebra mussel, it's easy, right? You stop collecting when you hit the rock, right? They're attached to it, you stop collecting. When it's sediment, then you usually have to sort of take a bunch of sediment, put it in what's essentially like an onion bag, right? Actually, often is an onion bag, but just not one that had ever had onions, but one that came from the factory that makes the onion bags. So they basically then you get those mussels, and while we were doing that, we kept feeling that there were more mussels and more mussels below it, and the sediment was very unconsolidated. So it's not like a normal, you know, we're used to walking along the shore and in plant beds, and you walk on the sediment, and you might sink in a little bit, but we're talking like you could put your whole arm into the bottom of the lake when you're getting sort of at those deep depths, right? So, and some of those mussels were alive, so that wasn't what we were supposed to be measuring, so we just collected the surface ones, and we did a little test, which I'll tell you here. We took just 3 sites and took a smaller quadrat, because there were so many of them down there, of like how many mussels we got if we went as far as our arms could take us there. And there were live mussels there. It wasn't just shells. There were lots of them. So even though there were, say, 20,000 mussels per square meter that were there, all told, like you had 5,000 that were deeper as well. So we'll come back to that a little bit. So as you all know, the zebra mussels cause a lot of problems if you have like intakes at your house or anything on the lake. You know, the veligers I talked about, right? That's what gets sucked into your intakes of water, and then they turn into bigger mussels and clog your pipes. And that happens also in the water treatment plants. They have to do stuff for them. So it caused a lot of cost to people. That's part of why people got so interested in zebra and quagga mussels. It's estimated that it's about $1 billion a year in the U.S., so the latest value I could get, that people are paying it for industrial inputs and other inputs to keep the mussels out. There's some people developing materials that they can't settle on, so that may change in terms of maintenance cost if they change to that. They may also promote growth of harmful microorganisms, so there's been some various kinds of outbreaks that way. There's been a lot of best management practices and other things trying to get rid of them. A lot of efforts on that. I just want to talk briefly. They have had success. If someone tells you they've gotten zebra mussels out of a lake, most of the places that they've succeeded with using those chemicals are really in isolated ponds or quarries because of that veliger stage. It's not something that's like feasible for one of the Finger Lakes right now. And if you killed all the mussels at the bottom of the lake all at once, that probably would cause a big oxygen demand and also cause trouble. So even if you could do it, you really probably would have to think a lot about the ecological effects of doing that as well at this point. So when you have these quagga mussels that are really deep, it's also been correlated with a decline in some pretty important small invertebrates that were important food for fish. And a lot of you, I'm sure, are fishermen. A lot of people come to the lakes to fish. And so Dipraia, it's gotten named several things several times, but we'll go with that. This little amphipod is a crustacean that's historically a major food source for fish. It eats a lot of a kind of algae called diatoms that are super nutritious. That they actually are the things that make the fish oils, and then the fish would get the fish oils by eating the invertebrates that eat those diatoms. And so these are they. So the little gut of these guys is just full of either diatoms that are growing on rocks. Like if you've ever slipped on a rock that looked a little brown, you could curse the diatoms. But they also are basically making the fatty acids that these guys need. In fact, if you take fatty acid pills, you're eating things that were originally marine diatoms that got eaten by, little invertebrates like this guy that then got eaten by the fish that we took the fish oil out, which is really diatom oil. That's a little factoid for today. So Jim Watkins, again in his paper, if you look at his abundance data, he had some really interesting patterns. So if we look over here, if you can see, it's hard to see here. So there you see these patterns that as you're going from this side where you have, it's right at the shoreline, and then you're getting deeper and deeper. In these different graphs, you can see the difference in what's happening. So the top graph is the quagga mussels, and at that time in 2012, there were no quagga mussels in this lake. So just think, like, we're not that far from that, and like we have tons of quagga mussels, right? And in 2020, when we were sampling, we had tons of quagga mussels. So there's no line for Owasco Lake that's getting you anywhere, because there were no in this graph, there were no quagga mussels there. But there were zebra mussels, lots and lots of zebra mussels near shore in plants. And then here's that little dipraya, that amphipod, and you can see that they had actually also a fair amount of those at that time. So there was a really robust population that would have been good for fish condition at that time. So there are a lot of known and likely effects of Dreissenid mussels, and this little cartoon, I think, sort of can summarize them. Before we had those mussels, a lot of times the lakes were a little bit greener. We have at ESF like a boat steward program too, and a lot of times, a lot of the people, when the stewards are telling them they should dry their boat to get rid of the mussels, and people are like, hey, but like that makes the water clean and I like it. But part of that is taking away the algae, right? So what happens when you do that and take away the algae, you're gonna grow something when you have all those nutrients. So you can grow algae in the water, or you can grow plants, near shore. And especially once you move the algae away, right, then the transparency gets higher. So it's not like the lake is all green and the light isn't penetrating. The light is penetrating further down. You're getting more plant growth. Maybe you're getting that like nasty Cladophora looking algae that's on the shoreline. And so that's called benthified, because the bottom of the lake is the benthic zone. So you're basically making sort of a little area where you have high phosphorus near the shoreline, at the bottom, where the zebra mussels are eating all of that algae, they're excreting it out, right? And it's just making high nutrients there that can grow algae that's at the bottom, that can grow plants that are there. And you tend to then have lower phosphorus in the open water. So the lake got clearer, but you might have, harmful algal blooms right near shore, just not in the open water, perhaps. Near shore, you're getting that, those effects of pond weeds and filamentous algae. And there are many studies, and I'll talk about some recent ones soon, where mussels reject and don't eat toxic algae. They spit it back out. And in the process of them taking it in and spitting it out, the mussels can sometimes get a little burst of nutrients from passing through that or getting rejected and put in with other things that are decaying. So the first mussel, again, that invaded was the zebra mussel. And when that happened and there was all this recycling, you may remember, and you may still see it sometimes in the summer, Cladophora, this sort of green algae, started covering the nearshore zone, caused nuisances to recreation. Quagga mussels, when they're sort of deeper and in the sediments, they actually have a lot of ability to reject algae that is toxic. And so there's a lot of studies in the lab, especially like Hank Vanderploeg at the Glero Lab started doing a bunch of those stories, those studies. And then I'll talk about a few other ones coming up. So there's also an experiment that was presented just this year on that as well. And you can see here, and you can see here also, I won't play this, it'll be in the thing. If you want to watch the movie of them filtering, it actually is pretty interesting, so that you'll see them sort of sucking it in. Some stuff gets shunted away, and some stuff gets eaten. So they're really picky. It's hard to imagine that a little thing is so picky, but they are. And so you have mussels in the shallows with plants, where you're getting a lot of things happening, and more mussels even deeper. So we talked about them recycling near shore, but what's happening with the organisms, the quagga mussels that are so deep? So in the lab, we're starting to do some experiments, and so are others. One thing that's interesting is the mussels actually move. So you can, if you film like a tank where you put a mussel in, that's the little trough that it made overnight when it decided it wanted to take a little trip. So they can move around, resuspend sediments, and that sort of also may have effects on nutrient release as well. We had an undergrad from actually Syracuse, not ESF, who did an experiment with us looking at this idea of them burying themselves deeply. We used shallow sediments, and we examined the N and P release and just tried to see if they buried mostly. And the tanks were aerated, so that affected some of the release. There was no significant difference between the nutrients that were released if they could go down into the deeper sediment or not. However, some of them, even in this short experiment, actually were living down in the deep part of that really hard sediment, because this was sediment we got from near shore, like right off the one entrance point, not the really soft sediment you could put your hands in through. So those quagga mussels will sort of bury, act like earthworms, even when they're not in this really unconsolidated sediment. And it's really hard to do those studies other than, I think, if we could go out in the lake and put chambers out in the lake and measure how deeply they were going. We tried to do it in the lab, and we dove and we collected this. And this mud that's in here was actually all stirred up. When we collected it, it was just a loose, homogeneous thing that was right at the bottom of the lake. And it all just settles when you don't have the currents that are at the bottom of the lake. So I think in situ experiments have to happen for us to really get a sense of like what's happening, put chambers down, see what nutrients are being released, to know how we would really incorporate the released from mussels into like sort of the lake's nutrient model. So just really quickly, how does this link with other factors? So climate change is a thing. There's been a decrease of 20 days of ice cover over the record of, say, a long-term ecological station in Wisconsin. We see in all of the lakes around here, you know, people in the 1800s, they didn't have a lot to do. They wrote in their lakes, in their diary, when the ice went on the lake, when the ice came off the lake, in part because they could fish, right, when there was ice on or when it was all the way off, and when in between, you couldn't fish well. So increased summer water temperature can be a faster rate of increase than air temperature due to also mixing changes, because if the lake is warming up and there's less ice, then that surface layer gets hot, and then that stratifies and no heat really gets below it for the rest of the summer. So the longer you have the lake staying stratified with that hot part on top, the epilimnion, and then if you've ever swum down, you know, in the summer, you hit the cold part, right? They act almost like two separate lakes. So there's been a real pattern of increased temperatures, decreased ice, longer patterns of summer stratification, especially when you're somewhere away from the tropics. We get these more extreme rain events that a lot of you know about, right? Because that ends up then putting more nutrients into the lake. And that causes additional spread of species and additional nutrient loading from the runoff, especially if there's not good management practices. And so there are these interactions of reduced ice cover increased surface water temperature like you heard about from Tony, and then these changes in lake mixing, where you're stratifying it longer, affect a lot of the susceptibility to invasion and the nutrient cycling. So they're gonna do other things like maybe causing our patterns to change, maybe bring us new invaders. But like there's real shifts in temperatures that are going on there. So one thing that we've seen also is cyanobacteria actually, they are really good specialists in hot water. Just by raising the temperature, if you compete algae with each other, generally the cyanobacterium will do much better, grow faster, and outcompete like the diatoms that had the fatty acids in them. When the temperature is high, the cyanobacteria are gonna win competition. This pattern is seen all over the place. It's not just your lake, you know. It's seen all over the north temperate zone in the US and in Europe and in Asia. And so with stronger periods of stratification, you reduce the mixing, and then things that are like diatoms, which are big and live in sort of a glass case, right? They're heavy, they sink when the lake isn't being mixed all the time. So the sooner we stratify the lake and make that warm layer on the top, then you're gonna have the diatoms stop growing, they sink, and you're not getting those diatoms occurring as long. So you lose the really large, heavy, really nutritious algae that are making fish oils that your fish need. And again, they should be diatom oils. So diatoms are declining all across the north temperate zone. In all the long-term records, we see that is the case. So cyanobacteria have a higher growth rate than other phytoplankton at water temperatures that are above 25 degrees C. And that was an uncommon temperature to hit, but now we hit that temperature for longer in the summer. So we're gonna get things like these blooms just because we're making it warmer. Cyanobacteria really, they're like your friend who only wants to be in the tropics, right? Comes back up here only for a week in the summer or something when it's warm. And Tony showed this slide. I figured he would, so I will not do it. But we're also increasing the cyanobacteria because they're competing well then. And some species have the ability to move up and down in the water column. They can adjust their buoyancy, and that gives them another advantage. So if they're at the surface, right, everything's photosynthesizing and growing, they're using all the nutrients. And then when they use up all the nutrients, anything that can go into the bottom layers of the lake or move below the thermocline where the nutrients are being recycled as everything decomposes, it can give some species of cyanobacteria another boost over everything else because they can move up and down. And we would see this diving sometimes in lakes, which we didn't like when we realized it, because you'd be going through a murky layer, and that would be like, we'd be like, oh, it was really murky at the bottom at our 6 a.m. dive. And then you'd be like, oh, it's really murky about 20 feet off the bottom at the next site. And then by the time you get to the next highest site, you're like, oh my goodness, like we were actually diving through a layer of cyanobacteria. And that's been quantified by researchers in China where they've seen the same thing. So invasive quagga mussels are actually also have been demonstrated by other researchers to dominate the phosphorus cycle of the Great Lakes. There's a huge amount of phosphorus now stored in the mussels themselves in the lake. So what people have, and especially Vincent Deneff at University of Michigan has done some great work showing that microcystis, one of the, as a lot of you, if you're doing the monitoring, know is one of the main sort of cyanobacteria we get blooming. Though they actually will, they actually are not very competitive unless the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus is high. So unless there's really high nitrogen, they also really like organic nitrogen. So the stuff that would come in manure or bad septic system, that is what they feast on. So some other kinds of phytoplankton can't use that organic nutrient as easily as the inorganic phosphate. So that it has an advantage when those things are present. They're rarely monitored measured directly in monitoring programs, although like when Tony showed you all the DEC data, they'd be part of total nitrogen. So they're monitored in the whole. And there's a lot of work by a bunch of people who study phytoplankton that microcystis strains may grow faster when when organic nitrogen and phosphorus are present. So definitely using best management practices for agriculture fields and stuff can really help. Same thing with sewage inputs. So I think, we have all these mussels, we have all of these invaders, but, the new normal, we have to manage a little differently because we're having a different set of things that are occurring. It's not anymore just that you can add phosphorus to a lake and make it green or not add it and make it clear. We also have to account for recycling by these mussels or these invaders, and the changes that are occurring as we're changing maybe some of the mixing patterns as we're also changing the lake that way. So we have 2 species that invaded Owasco Lake that are invasive mussels. They may be a contributing factor, changing nutrient dynamics. This pattern that you're seeing here is the same as what people are seeing all across the north temperate zone of the world. So microcystis specifically, that genus seems to thrive with both high dissolved organic phosphorus and dissolved organic nitrogen. And so that means more than you might have needed to do before to try to reduce those organic nutrients. So that's my take home, and there's a lot of people I will give credit to here, and thanks for listening. If you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Kim. Great job, great job. Questions?
Yeah, I did. How are we going to get rid of them? That is like a good question. I wish I had an answer to that. I don't. People have ways that they get rid of them in a small area of, if you're like the reservoirs, when you take Skaneateles Lake water and move it to the reservoirs in the city, right, they can do some things to do that. In the whole lake, that's another question. I don't think we have a good solution to that yet, honestly. Ways that you might, people are trying to find ways to kill them, right, then that's going to release the nutrients and grow something else. So I don't think we have a good answer right now. There's solutions in small places, but there aren't solutions like for a whole lake right now. Other than we really need to rethink, what's coming into the lake, maybe have some additional kind of remediations for organic nitrogen coming into the lake.
Great. Kim, thank you so much for all of your work on this. Can you discuss the role of Dreissenids related to, whether it's zebra or quagga or both, related to taking granular total phosphorus and making it more bioavailable or soluble or readily available for the algal blooms to take up?
Yeah, so if you think about it, the cyanobacteria are taking dissolved phosphorus, whether it's organic or inorganic, and they're making their biomass out of it. They're growing more algae. And so that makes it particulate, and then it's an organic molecule, so even if the algal lyses, it's not just phosphate. So that's how they're doing it. What was the second half of your question?
It was just one question about the role of how they could possibly increase the availability of taking it from a granular phosphorus to a more soluble, bioavailable for the blooms, basically.
Yeah, so it's
Making
not
it more yummy.
It's not, the algae wouldn't be releasing it themselves, the cyanobacteria. They'd be sequestering it, and it would be either when they died and were lysed, like if there were a viral bloom, viruses that were lysing them, or if they're being eaten like by the zebra mussel or the quagga mussel, and then that zebra or quagga mussel is released, or the other zooplankton that eats them, because there are a few of them that can still eat cyanobacteria, then those things will excrete organic materials into the water as waste. Yep. Also inorganic.
Great talk, Kim. You covered a lot of material there. Question, I was glad to hear you bring up nitrogen, and it's really exciting to hear about the organic nitrogen role perhaps in the microcystis blooms. I was wondering if you've seen any literature on whether ammonia might be involved in that too. And the reason I ask, we've been measuring ammonia gas inputs to Finger Lakes, particularly Skaneateles, but also Owasco over the last several years, and it's going up. It's going up quite markedly. So do you think that might be a contributing factor to the blooms?
I think it could be. So there are a couple of studies that are a little bit contradictory. It gets a little messy and hard for people to do it unless they're really careful. There may be something out there. I didn't specifically, have not specifically looked again for probably the past year and a year and a half, so there may be something coming out. But definitely there is evidence that like some of those cyanobacteria are taking up organic nitrogen, including ammonia. So that for certain species, like in lab experiments, certain of the groups can take it up more than others and may prefer it, yeah.
From your surveys, did you project how many mussels are in Owasco Lake and how much phosphorus they contain?
I didn't. We thought about it, but that wasn't like our task. So yeah, I actually could try to do that. It's a lot. I saw an estimate of someone did for another lake. Yeah, actually, I have the data that I could give you a rough estimate, but there's so much error on it with different patchiness. Yeah, I didn't feel comfortable like making that prediction, but I could do a back of the envelope calculation. So if people want that, I can actually probably do that pretty quickly at some point over the next couple weeks if they can post it and see that back of the envelope. I'll put the error bars on it, and that's going to be huge, so that's part of why we didn't do it.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear that there's a very large amount of retained phosphorus in our lakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
We have a question from the webinar attendees. Jan Lossinger asks, how long do mussels live?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's things that kill them off. So like some of our invasives, like the gobies, they will kill them off. But they can live in the lab. There have been some that have lived like 5 years at least that I know of. I don't know that they live that long in the lake. I haven't seen too many demographic studies of them. I don't think there's a good way to age them in the lake that I know of, but I can try to find that too, because they grow at different rates and they have sort of growth marks, but I don't think they're actually true like annular marks. But I haven't really searched for that, so I'm not positive that it's not possible to just look at the growth pattern and age them. It's another thing, if you write it down, I'll try to post something after I look. That's why I like talking I get good questions that I have to think about. Cool.
Any other questions for Professor Schulz?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, our next presentation this morning from Lisa Cleckner, who's the director of the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart William Smith in Geneva, and a colleague, Ben Kelley.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Cleckner. I'm the director of the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. I'm here today with Ben Kelley to give you an update on what has been going on with the buoy over the last year and to provide some insights into lake changes that we are seeing as a result of having the buoy in the lake for the last decade. This presentation will have 3 parts. First will be a quick refresher about what the buoy is and what it does. Second, we will present some data and graphs, and the final part will be a short update on the Owasco Lake Data Portal. Before we get started, we want to thank you for funding our work over the last decade. John Halfman was the original person who started this program. Upon his retirement, we at the Finger Lakes Institute continue to operate the buoy, and we're most grateful to the watershed residents and everyone in Cayuga County, as well as the Emerson Foundation, for funding this work over time. As you know, the FLI, Finger Lakes Institute, is based at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and we strive to provide actionable scientific analysis for the region. We do this through research, education, and professional development opportunities not only for our students and campus, but also for Finger Lakes community members. Cayuga County has provided funding directly to the FLI for the last 2 years, and these funds support the deployment of the buoy as well as biweekly field visits and calibration checks, as well as troubleshooting and data management. As a reminder, the buoy is located in one of the deepest parts of Owasco Lake at a depth of about 150 feet. Owasco Lake has one of the highest ratios of watershed area to surface area of the lake, about 17:1, which is the highest ratio in the Finger Lakes. The implication of this is that what happens in the watershed has a tremendous impact on the lake. Here's a quick refresher on the buoy system. We use a sonde manufactured by YSI in Ohio. The sonde is about 3 feet long, and if you take this black cover off, you can see the different sensors that are part of the sonde. These measure different water quality parameters such as chlorophyll, turbidity, and dissolved oxygen. There's a wiper that cleans the sensors daily. The sonde is connected to a pontoon platform in the lake, and a data control system is used to change the depth of the sonde, which is attached to a winch. We collect 2 profiles a day, one starting at midnight, the other at noon, and water quality measurements are collected every 1.5 meters of depth. The data are transmitted to a computer at the FLI. One of the most important things we measure with this buoy is temperature. This is because lake dynamics, for instance, how nutrients are cycled between the top and bottom layers of the lake and where phytoplankton live, are governed by density differences among the layers of the lake. If something is denser, it will sink to the bottom. Water is most dense at 4 degrees C or about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice is colder, so it floats. And warm waters above 40 degrees Fahrenheit are found above the densest water. So in the spring and summer, when you're getting heating coming from the sun, you start to get areas that are warmer at the surface than below. The density differences between the layers mean that the surface and bottom layers do not mix again until the surface starts to cool into the late fall and winter. And this has profound implications for where nutrients and oxygen are found in the water column. This in turn impacts where phytoplankton grow and where different fish species live and at what depth you can find them. For 2024, in contrast to 2023, we had a much longer deployment of the buoy. We put it out on the lake on April 1st, which is a full month earlier than what we did in 2023. We also kept it out later, almost until Thanksgiving. Here's an overview of the temperature data for 2024. To refamiliarize everyone with these graphs that we make with the buoy data, we have depth on the y-axis. So the top of the graph is actually the surface of the lake. Depth goes down to about 45 meters. The x-axis is time, so this shows when we put the buoy out in April, and all the circles in the axis labels are when samples were collected. The color represents temperature. The range is about 40 degrees with the dark blue, going up to about 80 degrees with the red. We know that surface waters warm up in the spring, and this is driven by solar energy gain and warmer air temperatures. As the lake starts to warm at the surface, you can start to see distinct layers represented by the yellow and red areas, which will extend to about 30 to 45 feet down. These top layers do not easily exchange nutrients, such as nutrients with the blue areas, until we get turnover in the late fall. I want to point out April and why it was important for us to deploy the buoy earlier in 2024, as we wanted to better understand when the water column started to form these layers. As you can see in early April, the whole water column was mixed from surface to bottom, meaning that it had the same temperature water for all of the 150 meters of depth. And similarly, we want to have a better understanding of when the productivity in the lake begins, as that is driven by temperature, nutrients, and light. This is a graph of relative chlorophyll A, which is a proxy for phytoplankton production, and this is for the whole buoy deployment period. The higher chlorophyll A concentrations are represented by darker colors, including dark orange, yellow, and green, as opposed to the lighter orange, which you can see at deeper depths and earlier and later in the season. As we can see, there's a small pulse of chlorophyll in May, followed by the highest levels in June down to a depth of about 10 to 20 meters or about 30 to 40 feet. And then as we go through summer, we start to see other pulses of primary productivity in July and August. We also see some surface and shallow productivity in September, and 2024 was a particularly bad HAB year across the Finger Lakes. We also see the production of dissolved oxygen, and this is represented by this lower graph here on the left, when the chlorophyll is high. Ben's going to talk more about this, but this is all related to the photosynthesis equation where phytoplankton take water and carbon dioxide and turn it into dissolved oxygen and sugars. This energy source is the base of the lake food web. We're fortunate because the Finger Lakes are deep enough and we have dissolved oxygen at all depths during the year at offshore areas in Owasco Lake. Next, Ben will present on some of the long-term changes we are seeing in the buoy data. Ben? You're muted. Oops.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I was muted. So I'm gonna go into some more like long-term trends. But before I do that, I want to cover some basic terminology. When analyzing water quality trends in lakes, studies often focus on interannual patterns. However, this approach can obscure significant seasonal or depth-specific changes. For instance, a strong warming trend in June might appear only mildly significant or even undetectable when averaged across an entire year. Being able to describe the seasonality of change is important to understanding the drivers of changes in lake ecosystems. So when we're looking at subseasonal trends, we're looking at partitioning the data by months to determine how the seasonality of the lake is changing. The same is true when looking at the whole water column of the lake. As Lisa mentioned, layers of the lake become vertically distinct during the summer and act as sort of nested ecosystems within the lake. A change that is only observable in the bottom waters of the lake may be lost or muted when data is looked at from a vertically averaged interannual view. And so when we talk about vertical trends, that's what we're referring to. And then lastly, we are also going to cover just the basic interannual trends if there's no significant variation by month or by layer, and we can just evaluate things by year. And then briefly, some statistical terminology. When we're referring to a tendency in the data, that means that the p-value, or a measure of significance in trends, is less than 0.1. And then when we're referring to significant trends, that means the p-value is less than 0.05. And then just a brief terminology review again. The thermocline is the vertical region of the lake where the water temperature rapidly changes with depth and where the density gradient is the strongest. So this is where the lake begins to separate into those three distinct layers because of density differences where warm water is less dense and cold water is more dense. And just again, a brief refresher, the epilimnion, when we're referring to the epilimnion, that is the surface water, the water above the thermocline. The hypolimnion is the bottom water, or the water at the bottom of the lake. That's below the thermocline. And then there's this sort of ephemeral space in between the two called the metalimnion, which is the space between the two layers, generally defined as encompassing that region of rapid change in temperature where the thermocline is. So looking at the water chemistry data from those different sensors on the XO2 sonde that YSI makes, or that's on the buoy profiling system. The first one is salinity, or specific conductance. So looking at a decade of data, there was no significant variation by month or by layer of the lake, so we can evaluate things from a whole interannual perspective. And we see a general increase in specific conductance within the lake. John Halfman recently published a paper using specific conductance data dating back to 2005 to determine that there was no significant decadal scale trend observable in Owasco Lake. So he's using a data set that's much longer than ours. Since 2015, however, the buoy data has showed a highly significant increase. Again, significant means P is less than 0.05, of about a 1% increase in specific conductance per year, with 2024 showing the highest average value on record. John Halfman also demonstrated that within the Finger Lakes watersheds, broadly, total road length within Finger Lakes watersheds was correlated with chloride flux and total concentration. That relationship, however, did not hold for Owasco and Skinny Atlas lakes among the major Finger Lakes. Data from CSLAP on Owasco show that there is an abnormal low in specific conductance in the early 2010s. So this increasing trend may be more of a return to normality rather than like a dramatic increase over time. But nonetheless, there is still an observable increase in the data going back to 2015. Dissolved oxygen saturation content increased in the lake and was variable vertically. So we have a graph here that's separated by layer. Epi is the epilimnion, meta is the metalimnion, hypo is the hypolimnion. And the most notable increase occurred in the metalimnion, which was driven by a weakening of a metalimnetic oxygen minima, which we'll cover in the next slide. There was a significant increase in dissolved oxygen saturation in the metalimnion of about 2.36% per year. That's almost 20% over the study. That is more than 20% over the study period. And a tendency in the epilimnion of only 0.74%, about a little less than 10% increase over the study period. Globally, dissolved oxygen trends are experiencing a decline, especially in the hypolimnion, where anoxia or very low oxygen concentrations can be exacerbated by release of legacy phosphorus and subsequent cyanobacteria blooms, though this predominantly occurs on shallow eutrophic lakes, which Owasco is obviously not. An epilimnetic increase, however, could be signaling an increase in primary production in surface waters coming from a variety of sources, one of which could be phytoplankton growth. So covering that metalimnetic oxygen minima, these are common phenomena on lakes, regardless of the lake's trophic status. Owasco is not a eutrophic lake, so is not high in nutrient content. These minima are usually caused by an increase in biological activity in the metalimnion from microbes or grazers that increase respiration or the consumption of oxygen. And the decline in light availability with depth means that there is less photosynthesis and less production of oxygen, resulting in a net loss and a formation of the minima. This is not caused, this rise in metalimnetic oxygen content is not caused by a change in the volume of water, because as you can see in this graph here, the space between those black lines is the metalimnion, and it stays roughly the same in 2015, which is the left graph, and 2024, which is the right graph. It is unclear why the metalimnetic oxygen minima disappeared over time, but it is worth investigating further. Moving on, going into water temperature, so just looking at temperature trends. This is the epilimnion temperature. So the epilimnion temperature is the volumetrically weighted average temperature of the entire epilimnion, so that big surface layer of the lake, meaning that the contribution to the calculation is dependent on the volume of water at that particular temperature. So the surface layer having a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius or whatever is going to have the biggest impact because there's the most amount of water at the surface, looking at like the top topography of the lake. There was a tendency of increase in June of 0.223 degrees Celsius per year, which is 2.2 degrees Celsius per decade. This is 6 to 7 times greater than global estimates of lake temperature increase, and a significant increase in July of 0.118, or about 1.2 degrees Celsius per decade, is about 5 it's about 4 times greater than those global estimates. Both of these trends are lost in interannual analysis of the data. For more information on sub-seasonal temperature trends, I highly recommend reading a paper by Luke Winslow, published in 2017, where they did a cross-lake study of 6 lakes in Wisconsin that quantify these same trends. And a lot of this analysis was modeled off of what was done in that paper. Another way to look at water temperature is to just look at the data points within 1 meter depth of the lake surface. So a lot of studies will look at this layer and call it lake surface water temperature. We are looking at the first 1.5 meters depth from the surface because our buoy profiling system stops at 1.5 meters and at 1 meters. So we want to get more than just one data point in this average. So there was a significant increase in lake surface water temperature in July of 0.178 degrees Celsius per year, which is 1.8 degrees Celsius per decade, or almost 2 degrees Celsius overall. There was no significant interannual trend, and the trend in June that we saw in the epilimnion did not quite show up again in this calculation of water temperature, with the p-value just above 0.1. Usually, these increases in water temperature are correlated with increases in air temperature. However, this relationship did not hold. As you can see here, air temperature for June and July appears very random and scattered. In fact, the only significant trend was observed in September, which was a decline in air temperature trends. And this was not mimicked in those two previous graphs of the epilimnion and lake's surface water temperature calculations. I'm hesitant to say that this is like a highly significant trend because, as you can see, of September, the data is very disparate and the line doesn't even intersect any of the points. But nonetheless, it is there and worth investigating further. So for key takeaways from this analysis, just going back to the beginning here, there is a recent increase in specific conductance through the water column. There is an increase in dissolved oxygen saturation that varies vertically in the lake. And there is a dramatic warming of surface water temperatures in the early summer that is not explained by air temperature trends. The rate of increase in early season surface water temperatures is roughly 4 to 7 times greater than global estimates of lake surface water temperature trends. Although trends are expected to vary regionally with air temperatures, regardless, an increase of 1 to 2 degrees Celsius could have profound impacts on the lake. Many ecosystem processes are triggered by temperature signals, like fish spawning, phytoplankton species dominance periods. Higher temperatures favor more resilient phytoplankton species, like cyanobacteria and bloom-producing species. Increased temperature could mean decreased suitable habitat range for phytoplankton and grazing species, including bigger animals like fish, and resulting in this could result in cascading effects in food web dynamics. And lastly, longer and more intense stratification can result in reduced mixing and loss of dissolved oxygen content in bottom waters, although this was not observed in the data here. A lack of correlation in early summer temperature trends with air temperature, though, leaves room for interpretation on what is causing the water temperature trends in Owasco Lake. One possible explanation is that increasingly warmer winters. Historically, Owasco Lake freezes over, but has repeatedly failed to do so in recent years. Freezing is a critical behavior in lakes as they cause a reverse temperature inversion that stratifies the water beneath the ice when it freezes over. So you get sort of a second period of stratification during the winter. Without ice over, the surface waters do not get as cold, and this may translate in some sort of ecosystem memory effect that lasts into the summer and has sort of far-reaching effects from warmer winters. Warmer water earlier in the season could mean earlier periods of stratification and more intense periods of stratification. Preliminary analysis of stratification onset from the buoy data shows that stratification is occurring earlier in the season. However, the buoy deployment periods are not consistent to capture stratification onset, and offset, which is why one of our recommendations here is that buoy deployment should start earlier in the season and extend later in the season. Lisa showed the temperature graphic from 2024 where we were able to capture stratification onset and offset, and this is a very critical piece of information for determining shifts in ecosystem behavior in the lake. In closing, I'll leave with a few thoughts. One, it is absolutely imperative that high-frequency monitoring of Owasco Lake is continued. A data set of this size and frequency is already rare, but it is vital that high-frequency data sets be stewarded so that they can provide context to the current and coming changes to the lake's intricate, complex ecosystem. Without them, managers are flying somewhat blind on how to respond to climate-forced changes to the lake that will increase in magnitude and severity with climate change. Monitoring programs that operate on the scales of weeks to months are great, but they lack the temporal resolution to quantify short-term changes like storm events, which are not discussed here, but storm events are expected to increase in magnitude and severity and have direct influence on lakes, especially a lake like Owasco with a huge watershed. And it also, those monitoring, longer frequency monitoring programs do not capture the things we just talked about, like stratification, onset, and offset, which are also very important. Which is why the second recommendation is that buoy deployment season should be started as early in the year as possible and remain in the lake for as long as possible so that the buoy data set can capture vital information on stratification, onset, and offset, as well as changes in early and late season temperature trends. As it stands, the only months with complete coverage of the buoy data are the ones shown here, June, July, August, and September. But there may be changes occurring in May or October or April or November that are worth quantifying, so the buoy should be left out for as long as possible. Lastly, there should be a shift in attention on water quality research towards winter limnology and changing conditions in the off season of the lake when there's not a ton of activity from boaters or like broad public interest. Many different studies show that what happens to lakes in the winter may directly influence changes observed in the summer, and quantifying these relationships is vital for increased understanding of ecosystem processes and management of the lake. Where possible, resources should be allocated for leveraging existing data sets and for commencing new projects to investigate shifting winter conditions. Thank you for your time. I'm going to hand it back to Lisa to wrap things up.
Okay, great. Ben, can you hear me again? Thumbs up? Okay, great. Terrific. So finally, I just want to touch very briefly on the data portal that we've developed. Ben played a huge part in this. And in addition to the buoy data and the lake data that we have from John Halfman over the years, we've now added stream data as well. These are found on our web portal, and I want to acknowledge all the hard work that Ben and others did on the development of this site. So this is some stream data here collected by volunteers from Aula, and this shows soluble reactive phosphorus, or the bioavailable form of phosphorus that drives the productivity of phytoplankton for 4 different streams in the Owasco Lake watershed. As you can see, Van Ness Brook here in the purple has the highest concentrations of all streams, but it's also important to understand about the volume of water for each stream to be able to calculate loadings to the lake. And that's what the 9-element plan for Owasco Lake is telling us, and helping us figure out where we should be focusing our remediation activity. In addition to soluble reactive phosphorus, I have to show some nitrogen. So this is nitrate, which is important for cyanobacteria, such as microcystis, because nitrogen impacts toxin production in microcystis and others. So as we conclude, the information that we're collecting from the buoy is helping us understand what's happening within the lake. And now we can start to also look at decadal trends in water quality conditions. These data are critical for lake and watershed modeling, which in turn inform good decisions on the location and timing of implementation projects to better address nutrient sources. This public sharing of information that's been collected by so many residents in the watershed is very important because it represents a large investment not only of dollars from our government and foundations, but it's also people's time devoted to collecting really good data that contribute to our past and future understanding of the lake. We would like to acknowledge our colleagues at the Finger Lakes Institute who focus on watershed management, K through 12 education, harmful algal blooms, running a New York State certified lab, and addressing invasive species. And then finally, we want to acknowledge John and his initial acquisition of the instruments that are deployed on Owasco Lake. We also thank our 2024 summer research student, Aiden, who's been working with lake temperature data. This program is in good hands with us at the Finger Lakes Institute as we continue to build our data analysis infrastructure so we can better understand lake changes and the implications for the health of Owasco Lake. Thank you for your time and financial support.
Thank you for your attention so far. We have one more very interesting speaker. His name is Dr. Adam Effler, and Adam has a very challenging job. His role is to try to coordinate the lake-related and watershed-related activities around Owasco Lake of the various jurisdictions, of the many different governmental jurisdictions. That's a tough assignment, and try to do that role, he has a Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council that he chairs. He also is in charge of implementing now the state-approved phosphorus reduction 9-element plan. So Adam has a lot on his plate, and I would like to introduce him to you now.
Good morning and hello. Thank you, MC Hall, and also thank you to Aula for hosting this local conference. It's much appreciated. Right, okay, so our previous presenters, Tony and Kim, Lisa and Ben, really focused their talks on water quality trends and harmful algal blooms, as well as the invasive mussels in Kim's case. My talk will be greatly focused on what we, the collective we, are doing to protect the watershed. And there'll be two primary features of the talk. The shorter feature being the watershed inspection programming that the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council oversees, and the Clean Water Plan implementation, which involves a variety of partners and agencies. For some background on the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council, we're a 501c3 nonprofit local development corporation, and our overarching goal is protection and restoration of lake water quality, acknowledging the potential for lake perturbations from watershed activities and associated non-point source pollution. The overarching watershed goal targets prevention, which is considered the bottom-up approach, and pollutant reduction. And we're targeting this overarching goal through implementing our existing 1984 watershed rules and regulations, where our Watershed Inspection and Protection Division has broad success with compliance, through source water protection projects and programming, and public education, through consistent and common messaging to promote conservation education. So you'll see the logo there on the right. This is the Lake Friendly Living logo that we use. That's part of a much broader regional effort for promoting conservation messaging. And as you might gather, when targeting non-point source pollution, there are really two overarching challenges. One has to do with identifying sources, and the other has to do with trying to bring about change through behavioral change, working with the watershed community to make change. The Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes is a group that drives public education and towards conservation, specifically through land use practices and adoption of those practices through common and consistent messaging, as well as recognition initiatives. So trying to recognize those that are doing good work to help promote new work. This is an old map. It shows the founding members of the Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes. Really, it needs to be updated. We now have involvement with all of the various stewardship organizations across the region. And with a commitment to protecting the health of our lakes, the coalition works together to educate watershed residents and homes and businesses to engage lake-friendly practices. We have a pledge program on our website where watershed residents are encouraged to take the pledge to adopt some of those recommended practices. I'll dive in now to talk some about the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division and its roles. This is just a very basic flow chart. So the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council is greatly governed by the founding members, the City of Auburn, Cayuga County, and Town of Owasco, and then has oversight and input from the Board of Directors, which is represented by the various municipalities throughout the watershed, of which we have most of them on board and involved. And then you'll see to the right here, we have ex officio members that include the Cayuga County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Cayuga County Planning Department, as well as others. This is not an exhaustive list here. And then to the left, we work closely with New York State agencies, as well as below other agencies and organizations that work closely both with New York State and with the council. And the council oversees the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division, whereby we employ inspectors and at times deputy inspectors. The Inspection Division's mission is to make regular, thorough inspections of Owasco Lake, its watercourses, and its watershed, to identify compliance with the rules and regulations set forth for the Owasco Lake watershed, and to provide educational outreach within the watershed community that supports environmental awareness and stewardship. The Watershed Inspection Committee has monthly oversight, or provides monthly oversight to the watershed inspectors, and this is actually a snippet from the watershed rules and regulations. It shall be the responsibility of the Watershed Inspection Committee to oversee and manage the operation and implementation of the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection Program undertaken by the corporation, that's the council. And the Watershed Inspection Committee will have direct oversight of the Owasco Lake Inspection Program, now the Inspection Division, which shall be governed exclusively by the initial members or their successors ex officio. And we have listed below some of the current representatives for the members on that committee. I don't expect you to be able to read this, right? But this is section 104.1 of the City of Auburn and Town of Owasco. This is the Watershed Rules and Regulations document. 1984, these are the current regulations that we implement. And this document can be found on the Inspection Division's website as well as the Planning Department's website. Right, so now I'd like to welcome our lead inspector, Jesse Lloyd. Jesse will provide a couple of slides and examples of the boots-on-the-ground emergency response that the division provides, as well as some outreach initiatives that he's been involved with. Jesse.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great turnout. Hey, my name is Jesse Lloyd. I have a degree in geology, worked as an environmental geologist for about 13 years. I've been a resident of the Owasco Lake watershed for most of my life. I became the lead watershed inspector at the end of July of last year. So I'm going to show you guys a few of the highlights and lowlights of some of the stuff I've seen in that time. So this slide is actually a sewer main break down gradient of a pumping station, and the sewage was actually pumping onto the ground. When I got there, the local highway department was there, and the Cayuga County Sewer and Water Authority was on site. I called up the Soil and Water Conservation District, and they were able to run out a length of silt filter sock, and we were able to get that into place before any of the runoff reached the brook. This happened one cold December morning. The is a truck tanker carrying whey actually misjudged a corner and tipped into a ditch. When I got there, the local fire rescue was there, and the Cuyahoga County Sheriffs were on site. In a former life, I did spill response, so instinct kicked in. I asked fire rescue people if they had any shovels on hand, and they did. And so we were able to dam the ditch, preventing the flow of any of the diesel spill to go any further. After that, we located where the diesel was spilling out of the tank. Somehow the rescue department, they had a bunch of buckets on them, and we were able to containerize the diesel, preventing it from spilling into the ditch. And we did that until the truck was uprighted. This was an odd sight. This was reported to the DEC by the local fire department, and the fire department discovered it because it was on fire. And the strange thing about this one was the previous owner had been deceased for 6 years prior to this. And we looked at old satellite footage, and we saw that the waste oil arrived 3 to 4 years ago. DEC was kind of at a standstill finding out who they could get permission to get in there and do the cleanup. And with this being a small town, I was able to ask around, and I found some relatives of the previous owner, gave their contact information to the DEC, and through interviews, they were able to get the information that they needed to get in there, to be able to get the information they need to be able to go in there and clean it up. I just want to show a few pictures of people trying to prevent sediment from getting into the watershed. Trying to preach, have a sediment erosion control plan in place before you disturb soils. A few of the common methods of doing that are putting out a silt fence or silt logs. Those are very effective. Other ways of doing that are small retention basins, or even have a low gradient riparian buffer. The other big thing is once the work is done, please have a plan to get it stabilized as quick as possible. Do that through mulching and seeding, hydro seeding, which was amazing, geomats, or just various kinds of mulching. Another part of my job is education and outreach. One of the things I do is I write a monthly article for the Citizen newspaper. Those are some of the headlines there on the right. I've gotten editor's choice and top pick like three articles in a row. And I just wanted to let everybody know that, this is my job. I'm here and I'm available. If you guys have any questions, concern, water quality, related to the water quality, or just bored and want to chat, go ahead and give me a call. With that, I'll give it back to Adam. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Jesse's been doing a fantastic job since he's been on board with us, and I think this provided a good set of examples of where we really provide not just implementation of rules and regs work, we also provide liaison opportunities, right, between state agencies for support and emergency response. So thanks so much, Jesse. Just some useful facts and contact information. So you can review the current Owasco Lake Watershed Rules and Regulations. As mentioned, the Inspection Division and County Planning Department websites have that document uploaded. And if you suspect a problem affecting the lake or streams within the watershed, please make contact. All reports received will remain anonymous. To report a bloom on Owasco Lake, please visit the New York State DEC HABS notification page. There's an opportunity for some individuals who are interested, many of which are part of the Lake Association, to become trained so that they can officially report to the DEC. For important reminders, let's make sure we avoid disruption of trout spawning in-stream work. Should be avoided from November 1st through June 15th. And shoreline construction mean high water level is 713.9 feet. And that's important because if there's any construction activities near shore below that threshold, there is a permit required from the state. Also, there are stream classifications. The watershed has protected stream segments that may require permitting, and before performing any shoreline or stream bank construction, make certain state and federal permits are in place. This is just a screenshot of the cover page of our 2023 annual report. I just wanted to share we're working on developing our 2024 report. That should be completed soon, and we'll look to circulate that among the municipalities within the watershed, extending beyond just those on the board of directors, but throughout the entire watershed. We also make those reports available to the Lake Association, whomever's interested in the report. I wanted to transition here a little bit as I move into the 9-element plan implementation part of the talk to discuss what lake managers usually consider when making lake management decisions. And really what they consider are drivers or causes and what we can control. And so those causes are identified through what's called linear regression or correlation analyses to show where there are dependencies between multiple factors. And so there's a lot of talk about phosphorus here, and it's a target for reduction in many of the clean water plans. I just wanted to briefly review the concept of limiting nutrient. So the limiting nutrient is the nutrient in lowest quantity relative to an organism's need for growth, and phosphorus is known to be the limiting nutrient for algal production in freshwater systems. So this schematic here is pretty old, very grainy. I realize you can't really see much, but what I'd like you to do is sort of replace yield with primary productivity and the generation of vegetative matter, including lake macrophytes and algae. And you look at the barrel here on the left, really describing freshwater systems, and the various staves on that barrel, so the parameters that could have an influence driving primary productivity. And you'll see that where the water overflows that barrel on phosphorus, that the ultimately primary productivity there is limited by phosphorus. And then the barrel on the right could really describe limiting primary productivity in saltwater systems where nitrogen is limiting. Okay, so as we dive into more of the details and background on the Lake 9-element plan for phosphorus reduction, I do want to give some credit to Michelle Wunderlich from the Kiwi County Planning Department. She's been very helpful in helping us stay on point and organized with that work. She also has developed a flyer that gives some background information on the project that's available out front. Some of the details for the background are included within my slides this morning, as well as some of the details from the progress report that we're working on for the 9-element coordination committee that's been created. So of course, the background, Kiwi County received the New York State Department of State grant to implement the priority recommendation from what was the 2016 Owasco Lake Watershed Management and Waterfront Revitalization Plan. And that was to incorporate the EPA's 9 elements into the plan. And the project was led by the Kiwi County Department of Planning and Economic Development, and a consultant was hired on for the project. They were Ecologic LLC. And the Owasco Lake Watershed 9-element plan for phosphorus reduction was approved by New York State in the Department of State and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation in September of 2022. This clean water plan is intended to advance efforts to restore and protect the water quality of Owasco Lake and its watershed. And the collaborative effort identified focused strategies to ensure the lake's water supply, aquatic habitat, and recreational uses are protected. A recommended practice within the plan for phosphorus reduction was supporting the Management Council's central role in lake and watershed management. On November 15th of 2022, the Management Council Board of Directors approved of the creation of what we refer to as the 9-element plan project coordination committee that prioritizes, coordinates, and facilitates projects and programming implementation based on the recommendations of the 9-element plan. Many of those various partners were those that were involved with the development of the plan itself, right? And in terms of personnel and capacity, we have limited bandwidth, so we draw upon our partners in collaboration wherever we can. Here's a list of our partnerships and collaborations here. And of course, very appreciative to all of those who've come on board with the committee. This is actually not comprehensive any longer. We have more recently had involvement from the Central New York, the Finger Lakes Land Trust. They have been involved. We found some synergies with some of the land acquisition work they've been doing. Tony will join us when he's available on the call representing the state, keeping us tuned into opportunities related to those projects we're seeking and according to the recommendations of the plan. I want to talk a little bit on the background of the plan itself. The plan used a model. It's called the Soil and Water Assessment Tool. It's a hydrologic model, identified 5 sub-watersheds, and they were all evaluated for the lake impacts and recommendations. You can just see the sub-watersheds here represented by different colors. For developing the model, different characteristics were looked at, including land use, soils, and slope. And the land use percentages within the Owasco Lake watershed were also important to model development. For the entire watershed, agriculture makes up about 55% of the land use base. About 41% is forest, and developed lands are only 3%. And then, of course, those percentages were broken up for all of the sub-watersheds as well. The map on the left shows in green the portions of the watershed that are agricultural land use. This was an important figure that came out of the use of the model for developing the 9-element plan for phosphorus reduction. And based on the 9-element plan's model, agricultural land use contributes proportionally more nutrients and suspended sediments per acre than any other land use in the watershed. And the model also predicted that 90% of the phosphorus loads originate from the agricultural sector. These estimates and recommendations were very consistent with some of the other clean water plans for adjacent Finger Lakes in central New York. For BMP model scenario modeling, there were a variety of BMPs that were looked at. I'm just giving you a snapshot. Grass waterways, residue management, stream bank stabilization were all considered. Ultimately, what were the findings of the SWAT model and recommendations? The SWAT model recommended that a 90% reduction of phosphorus loading would result from 4 best management or remediation practices. 1 being the adoption of nutrient management planning for all farms. 2, restrictions of manure and fertilizer application to the land. 3, expansion of winter, that is cover crops, and stream bank stabilization. If you look at the map figure on the left, the sub-watersheds are broken up by shades of orange, showing the darker shade of orange being higher priority sub-watersheds with regards to phosphorus loading for total phosphorus, and then thereby higher priority targets for watershed remediation and restoration activities. Okay, so talking about stream bank stabilization here as a pursuit, that we have a stream bank stabilization project that was proposed in 2023 under the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the council was funded nearly $500,000 for what we call the Owasco Lake Watershed Critical Streams Restoration Project. In my view, there was some early committee success due to our high level of collaboration among partners and the expertise brought by the various members, several of whom will be direct partners and have been direct partners on implementing this stream restoration project on the Owasco Inlet. The project targets the project sites along the inlet between Booth Hill Road and Cat Path Road in the town of Locke. Landowners who reside along the targeted reaches have expressed concern about severe stream bank erosion in those areas. This picture here on the lower left shows site 2 for the project, and you can see that highly scoured and eroded stream bank that will be targeted for restoration. And I also included the map figure that I referenced earlier to show that this is a sub-watershed here, number 3 here, that's considered a high priority sub-watershed for targeting project implementation. This is a map that was generated, really part of the proposal that was submitted to the foundation, just showing some of the sites there along the reach for stream bank restoration. So there were committee grant proposals that were also submitted in response to the New York State grant program solicitations in the summer of 2023. We're still underway with some of that work. The following was funded. The City of Auburn submitted a non-point, non-ag planning grant proposal to assess stream corridors, including for Sucker and Van Ness Brooks, as well as other small tributaries within that prioritized Owasco Lake Huck 12. So that's a sub-watershed categorization, and the Owasco Lake Huck 12 is at the northern end of the lake, considered a high priority for restoration activities. and $75,000 was awarded. This is really neat because this is really the first instance where the city is taking a primary leadership role for administering a watershed-style grant. And actually, the city worked among the committee partners to develop an RFP that was submitted to a variety of local engineering firms that submitted proposals, and this coming Tuesday, in fact, we'll be convening to discuss the various engineering proposals and scoring those proposals. Let's talk about road and ditch projects. The Owasco Lake Fire Lane Drainage Improvement Project was led by the Key County Soil and Water Conservation District, which received a grant through the WEQIP program. That was one of the programs Tony mentioned earlier that the state is funding to stabilize road ditches, to increase culverts to convey stormwater efficiently, and manipulate drainage pathways to prevent flooding along fire lanes that are located around Owasco Lake. The district staff assessed over 60 fire lanes and ranked them as having the worst to best conditions. The top 10 worst fire lanes and their point of contact worked with the district to develop a work plan that is the foundation for implementation for that project. The county staff completed the stabilization work on Fire Lane 19W in the town of Scipio in 2024. There are a couple of photos for that particular target. Again, Fire Lane 19W, both the before photo here and then the after stabilization. Again, before and after photos for Fire Lane 20E. Also under road and ditch projects, funded by FLOPA, the Key County District used FLOPA funds and worked with a local contractor in the Indian Cove Association to stabilize 250 feet of an unnamed tributary to Owasco Lake by installing heavy stone fill along the bank to protect the banks from erosion and provide a reduction in stormwater velocities. Again, the before and after photos of that stabilization work, thanks to the district. Another project under Road and Ditch Project, the Encinor Road Ditch Stabilization Project, whereby the district worked with the town of Scipio to install over 1,200 feet of rock line ditch stabilization, and of course to protect Owasco Lake from sedimentation and nutrient inputs. The project was funded through the DEC WEQIP grant, again, with in-kind services by the town of Scipio Highway Department, as well as supplemental funding provided by AULA. So thanks to the Lake Association on that project. This is another Key County Soil and Water project under road and ditches, stream crossing assessments. So they used grant funds in 2023 to finish inputting stream crossing assessments for the watershed into the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative compliant database. That database provides protocols for road stream crossings, primarily culverts and bridges, to assess and score the crossings for fish and wildlife passability, as well as to assess culvert conditions and other data useful for evaluating failure risks. We'll talk some about invasive species management. Right, so according to Kim Schulz's talk, we understand the potentially devastating impacts of the spread of invasive species, both aquatic and terrestrial. And so it's really important that we target reducing the spread of invasive species, as that many of their potential impacts are unknown, and some of the existing impacts we know have been detrimental for the lake. Under aquatic vegetation harvesting, FLOPA funds were utilized by the district-owned equipment and staff to harvest aquatic vegetation in Owasco Lake in 2023 and 2024. The district removed an estimated 378 cubic yards of material from the lake in 2023 and 165 cubic yards in 2024. It's further estimated that approximately 1,482 pounds of nitrogen and 126 pounds of phosphorus were removed in the process. There's also a boat cleaning station, which we're working towards making progress with folks to actually use and adopt the use of this particular equipment to actually clean their watercrafts before and leaving the water body. This was manufactured by CD3 and is located at Emerson Park near the boat launch. And the county provided FLOPA funds needed for the operation and maintenance of that station. There's also a clean drain dry billboard. So this is a management council grant award for acquiring that billboard, and it points to clean, dry, and draining watercrafts as a recommended practice. That is also typically housed at Emerson Park during the active recreation season. Invasive species management. So the Finger Lakes Institute and Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management out of Hobart William Smith, like Lisa and Ben, they provide the boat launch steward at the Emerson Park boat launch, and that's a seasonal annual activity for the summer months, for their recreation months. And the PRISM surveyed Owasco Lake for priority species such as hydrilla and other aquatic invasive species in 2023 and 2024. Again, a photo there of the portaboard. Under invasive species management, the hemlock woolly adelgid project, whereby the Lake Association received nearly $250,000, I'll say $139,000 grant from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for the Owasco Lake Watershed 2022 to 2023 hemlock woolly adelgid suppression project. And that was back in 2021. They're still working on that project. Accordingly, trees infested with HWA were treated with insecticide from 2022 to 2023, utilizing funds from that program. And by the end of 2023, 10,000 hemlock trees were treated, and AWLA plans to continue treatment again this year, rather. So we'll get to some more broad projects here, watershed-based projects. The Nature Conservancy transferred what would become the Fillmore Nature Preserve in the town of Sempronius to the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council. That was in 2023. TNC had ranked the 161-acre property as one of the 10 most impactful parcels in the Owasco Lake watershed, with the greatest effect on water quality if preserved from development. So protecting ecosystem services, and those services are provided by wetland areas as well as forested areas. Okay, the land includes diverse forests and approximately 40 acres of freshwater wetlands, and the preserve now includes marked trails, an educational kiosk, boot brush station, and a perennial pollinator wildflower garden. You can see here in these, we have a map here of the actual wetlands within the greater preserve area. This is the boundary signage around the preserve. The boot brush stations, the small grant that we worked with with PRISM to develop. And then this is one of the kiosk panels, as you might see when accessing a trail to go hiking. It provides information on the project and discusses the various wetland ecosystem features. Okay, for watershed projects, well, actually, I wanted to note the Nature Conservancy, they donated a 203-acre property to the Fillmore Glen State Park in Moravia in 2024. The property consists of vacant woodlands and approximately 50 acres of freshwater forest and shrub wetlands with 2 seasonal streams. Both streams flow north into Dry Creek within Fillmore Glen State Park, where they feed the park's natural swimming pool, then flow into the Owasco Inlet. The Nature Conservancy, again, a very close working partner with us. They protected 72 acres recently, this last year, of forested wetlands in Venice. The newly protected land is home to a diverse forest of hemlocks, white pines, birch, and beech. It includes several streams and also it provides habitat for many species, including grouse, coyote, and deer. And the extensive wetlands on the property also function as a natural filter, using the runoff from neighboring properties before the water ultimately reaches Owasco Lake. So sort of as a buffer and providing ecosystem services to help reduce contaminants that may enter the lake. The Finger Lakes Land Trust has been very successful in implementing watershed projects in the Owasco Lake watershed. They accepted a donation of a conservation easement, 160 acres of farmland in the town of Scipio from the Post family in 2023. And ensures that the farm is not developed. And the easement also expands vegetative buffers along the stream intended to reduce runoff to the lake. In the fall of 2023, the Land Trust staff and volunteers planted nearly 400 trees and shrubs along 5,000 feet of a tributary on the property that flows into Owasco Lake. And funds from the project came from the New York's Environmental Protection Fund and the New York State Conservation Partnership Program as administered by the Land Trust Alliance. Again, the Finger Lakes Land Trust was recently awarded, 2024, $1,240,000 New York State Department of Environmental Conservation WEQIP grant. It's been an important category for us recently. This was in 2024. The Land Trust will work with landowners and partners in the Owasco Lake Watershed to permanently protect approximately 500 acres through direct acquisition and the use of professional conservation easements. This is a neat project for us, for the coordination committee, for that 9-element plan, because there are some synergies here with respect to the stream corridor assessment project that we're also underway with. Based on the recommendations that come out of that assessment, they may be better positioned then to target particular parcels within this area for land acquisition activities. Also, watershed projects, Ducks Unlimited, they were recently awarded about $250,000 by the New York State WEQIP grant program in 2024 to restore a wetland in the Owasco Flats wildlife management area near the town of Moravia. And the project will provide habitat for migratory birds and other wildlife, help mitigate flood impacts downstream, and improve water quality. So again, Owasco Flats is considered a priority area here with regards to watershed management and reducing phosphorus loading to the lake. Right, watershed projects, there have been many. So the Inspection and Protection Division from 2022 to 2024, revenue to the Management Council increased by approximately 27%. And this increase in funding generated by enhanced government and external grant income provided for staffing 2 watershed inspectors over that time frame. So it's important, more eyes on the ground, more boots on the ground for emergency response scenarios. And then also, the New York State Septic System Replacement Program has been ongoing for several years now. The Cuyahoga County Health Department garners that program locally, and they've encouraged residents to utilize the New York State Replacement Program for their septic systems where applicable. For green infrastructure projects, these are often fun, sort of hands-on, community-based projects. We've implemented several of these over the last several years. The council, as well as Aula and Cuyahoga County Parks and Trails, installed a rain garden in Emerson Park in 2023, and it was expanded and improved in 2024 as part of the Lake Friendly Living program. We try to annually provide for a community event under the Lake Friendly Living banner. The Cuyahoga County Parks and Trails added 6,000 square feet of permeable parking at the Ag Museum, with some funding coming from the Friends of the Ag Museum in 2024. Cuyahoga County Parks expanded the buffer zones around Dovell Island in 2024. And the council and the Lake Association participated in the 2024 Lake Friendly Living event at the Fillmore Nature Preserve, again acquired in 2023, where they covered approximately 480 feet of the preserve's public access lot perimeter with 12 cubic yards of compost, then seeded it with wildflowers. So it's a sort of an attractive access area now to that nature preserve. And also lastly, Aula provided the Friends of Fillmore Glen State Park. They joined the Friends of Fillmore Glen State Park and other community volunteers and the park staff to establish a new native plant garden in Fillmore Glen State Park as part of their 2024 I Love My Park Day. And you can see the photos here on the right show some of the Aula members and volunteers that were involved in that particular event. These photos capture the establishment of that perennial wildflower garden around the perimeter of the public access lot at Fillmore. And we have a picture of our friend and colleague here, Ken Kudla, helping out with spreading the compost and then seeding the area as well. So importantly, we need to talk some on supporting progress with ag conservation, right? This is like a sort of a headline banner in terms of recommendations under the 9-element plan for phosphorus reduction. And improving lake water quality and supporting local farms are not mutually exclusive concepts, right? And that's really important, and we're fortunate for that. And producers or farmers have been at the table and improving efficiencies through what they call agronomics for many years. Investments in nutrient mass balance on the farm is derived from both land stewardship and economic incentives, right? So So for them, they don't want to use more fertilizer than they need. Fertilizers have grown very expensive in recent years, and they're interested in improved soil health and mass balance so that they can run their efficient farms. And continued progress with the adoption of nutrient management planning can result from external financial investments, supporting agency among farmers, and recognizing those who are making strides in conservation. So I recommend supporting the districts. They have their agricultural environmental management program that they garner, which is within that program used for advancing nutrient management planning on the farm. And so the extent to which we can support the district's efforts to that end is very important. So agricultural runoff, I mean, this is sort of what we don't want to see. And this is a picture from Carl Weber from the Lake Association just this last year. And the best management practices that are developed and put in place try to reduce some of the impacts and mobilization of sediments associated with this runoff condition. Here's one example. This is from a couple of years back, maybe several now, where supplemental ag practice funding was provided to create what's called a water and sediment control basin. In this case, the City of Auburn and Great Lakes Commission funded the WASCOB, the acronym for that practice. And the council administered the project and funding, and our implementation partner, the Cayuga County Conservation District, implemented the project. I want to talk some about education and outreach. So we have a variety of subcategories here. Residential guidelines to protect water quality in Cayuga County were developed. Those are available on the council's and the Cayuga County WQMA websites and distributed to the council directors to post on their respective websites as well. The Lake Friendly Living Program pledge. The council website has information on the program and how to get involved. And Lake Friendly Living signs are provided to those who take the pledge, so I encourage folks to visit our website, look at the various recommended practices within the pledge, and consider taking that pledge. Conservation Field Days, Council and Planning Department staff hosted a station at the Conservation Field Days, which is really spearheaded by the Cayuga County Soil and Water Conservation District, on invasive species in 2024. And subsequently, Union Springs Middle School students wrote essays about invasive species and their impact. So we're really trying to get through to youth, to young adults, realizing that they really are our future here. So the education component there is very important. Tributary signage. This was a neat project from last year, the council's tributary adoption and identification project, which involved the installation of tributary signage in the watershed. And the purpose being to increase public awareness of the watershed watercourses, provide easily accessible contact information for members of the public to engage with the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division, and to communicate their watershed concerns. So this is this figure here shows the general design of these tributary signs. It shows to the lower left a QR code whereby folks can use their smart device to directly connect to the Inspection Division's website for more information about the program and for contact information to engage with our watershed inspectors. We worked with the highway departments to install these signs. This sign is on Decker Creek in the Mill Creek sub-watershed. Okay, and just to wrap up here, we'll talk some on tracking progress and monitoring. Both quantitative and qualitative metrics will be used to track implementation of the 9-element plan and the extent to which Owasco Lake supports its best uses, as I mentioned earlier, for water supply, aquatic habitat, salmonid fishery, and contact recreation, all very important for us. The primary metric draws upon the annual monitoring reports for Owasco Lake from the CSLAP program that Tony referred to earlier. Whereby chlorophyll A is considered a response variable by the state, and a summer average chlorophyll A concentration at or below 4 micrograms per liter, as documented through CSLAP, is considered evidence of successful implementation of the plan. Secondary metrics include updating the model with best practices implemented and percent increases of best practices advanced within the watershed. I put an asterisk here because it's important to understand that utilizing the extent of BMPs implemented as a measure of water quality improvement is in fact deterministic and can only explain the plan performance with respect to the model recommendations, not the actual water quality conditions. And BMP metrics cannot replace direct lake and watershed monitoring. And this is really important because we don't perhaps have as much data in the applied setting with regards to the efficacy of best management practices as we might like. So continued monitoring is important. For monitoring activities, AULA, and funded by FLOPA and Cayuga County, has volunteers that work with the council staff to conduct sampling under an approved QAP, that's a quality assurance project plan that's required by New York State for these sorts of monitoring activities, and to deliver the samples to Upstate Freshwater Institute, which is an ELAP certified lab. The Owasco Lake Buoy, so Lisa Cleckner and Ben spoke on that during their recorded presentation. That's the Finger Lakes Institute and Hobart William Smith College's robotic buoy on Owasco Lake. That's under a short form QAP. And the data for the buoy, as well as other water quality data for Owasco Lake, was digitized. And we're looking forward to more development of the database there so we have more access to those data. And the buoy was funded by Cayuga County, and the data portal was funded by FLOPA. The Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program, CSLAP, is important, and we talked some on that. Lisa spoke on that. Tony referred to that earlier this morning, whereby AULA volunteers conduct the CSLAP at one site on Owasco Lake annually. This is partially funded by FLOPA. And so CSLAP has been very important for long-term monitoring. For instance, based on the long-term monitoring program, we've identified that New York State lakes are warming at about 0.4 degrees Celsius every decade. And it's only through long-term monitoring that you can really capture those trends. And then also, Tony referred to the New York State DEC monitoring efforts, and the DEC lake tributary and HABs monitoring data are all available online, and he provided those links earlier this morning. And that's it, sort of an abrupt end. I realize it was a lot of content. Folks are probably really hungry for lunch at this point. I'm more than happy to take any questions.
We have a question from Phil Dan online. Does stream bank stabilization include roadside ditches repurposed as tributaries to drain field tiles buried on cropland where nitrogen and phosphorus's effluent CAFO consumables flushed by liquid manure application?
Wow, I'll tell you. Very complicated question. It sounds like there may be multiple questions in there. And I think maybe potentially a bit loaded with regards to the drain tiles and their impacts. So sort of what I have come to learn is a bit of a misunderstanding with regards to farm field drain tiles. By design, those tiles are intended to actually reduce sheet flow and surface runoff by allowing water to move through the soil and be able to discharge that water in a cleaner fashion to ditches and to water courses. It's, although they appear to represent an opportunity for point source research sort of on a micro scale. The limited studies that have been done do not show significant increases with respect to discharge from those drain tiles compared with the discharges that are often observed at the surface.
Hi, I'm Margie Creamer from Owasco Lake, and I'm wondering about the lake-friendly living plan for this year for Owasco. Is there any plan in place?
So by planned, do you mean for an event that we might have, Margie? So I work closely with Margie and a number of other stewards across the region. Typically, we pull together a spring event. It's something we haven't gotten together with AULA on yet. Usually that's an event that we partner on together. I do look forward to pulling something together for the spring.
Yes, I was talking about
Okay.
a plan.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Okay. All right. Hello.
Yes, sir. Thank you for yourself and all the speakers here today. My question is this. When we think of just the biggest impact probably could be made was, regardless of all the mitigating procedures that we've all talked about and you guys have talked about, at the farming level, the quality of what's happening there and how to control that. Could you just touch on your take on, obviously, society, where we've come to? We need food, the farmers need to do it economically right for themselves, all the above. But it's often thought as impossible regenerative farming practices on a scalable level where we're not doing styles that have been done since 70s or give or take. But how that's not impossible if the right impact, influence, and funding's out there to allow those farmers to make moves. It may take time, everything takes time, but how that could affect all this, if you will.
Yeah, it's a great question, and perhaps somewhat rhetorical. I mean, my perspective is that by design, the industrial monocrop farming that we have currently is perhaps not ideal. However, this is what we have currently. There's a very large-scale industry in terms of farming and ag production throughout the state that now depends on that design. In my view, the most important, perhaps even identified within the 9-element plan, pursuit would be to support farmers in their own pursuit, under their own interests and efficiencies, to develop nutrient management plans. It's, of course, to their benefit as well as to the benefit of protecting water quality. So, in terms of the notion of a paradigm shift back to more sustainable farming, it's that would be quite the endeavor. I think what we need to do is to keep and continue to advance the various features of sustainable farming that we have through the recommended best management practices that we understand.
There's another question from online. Can we use Dr. R. Hoffman's specific conductivity as a measure of water quality adjusted for the seasonal skew of road salt application and liquid manure transport?
You may have to repeat that one. Yeah, please do.
Can we use Dr. R. Hoffman's specific conductivity as a measure of water quality adjusted for the seasonal skew of road salt application and liquid manure transport?
I think it's an interesting endeavor in terms of research. The can then may be different than the should. I mean, I'd say there's a should, but the can I think has a caveat. So we often try to pursue research that has an accreditation with New York State and with Dr. Hoffman's research through many years. He's really been the leading expert on Owasco. One of the challenges that we've had has to do with the nature of the student-run lab that he uses, and I'm not diminishing the work that was done there, but there are some challenges there in terms of QA/QC, and the reason that's important really is when working with New York State, those QA/QC measures are required for us to be in place when we're referencing research and data with regards to requesting funding through grants and such. So specifically, I mean, the question, I think it's a great notion. It sounds like it's more of a recommendation than a question from this particular individual. Can we take a look at those trends, those salinity trends, and make something of it, try to understand impacts on the lake? Absolutely.
We have another one online while we get the microphone to somebody else. Where's the waste sludge from Auburn and the Owasco Watershed spread?
the Auburn and Owasco watershed. So from the lake watershed, where's the waste sludge spread? Okay, so I think that question has to do with the wastewater treatment facility, which would be the city of Auburn's treatment facility. And they currently have sludge as a byproduct for their treatment processes that is landfilled. They are underway with a project to investigate its use for biosolids spreading. And so, although it seems like it may be a pragmatic solution, allowing for some nutrient fertilizer opportunities for ag farms and the disposal of that byproduct from Auburn. Of course, there are some concerns there with regards to emerging contaminants, particularly PFAS. So currently landfilled, to answer the question. Yeah.
I just have a question about, I'm wondering about during the months of May and June when the farm fields are fertilized and they're exposed to severe weather conditions and the roly-poliness of the land around the lake. It seems to me that would be a significant amount of nutrient loading going into the lake under certain storm conditions when the fields are so barren, except for the fertilizer and stuff that's there. You do get the runoff, you do get the streams rising up and flowing rapidly. Hedgerows are gone. You can see from one road to the next. And the roly-poliness of our terrain seems to suggest that that would be a major excursion during that period of time, and yet the results of the damage to the lake would not show up until later on.
That's a great point, and certainly a concern. There are currently no regulations in place to prohibit, the spreading of manure and/or fertilizers during that time frame. And of course, with the inundation of snow melt and storms, and of course what we understand may be the storms of the future, they do pose a big problem with regards to mobilizing nutrients and sediments to the lake as the receiving water body. It's a really good point. And of course, the best management practices that we're advancing through voluntary adoption are designed to reduce some of those impacts and in terms of mobilizing sediments and nutrients.
Yes, Adam. Yes, Adam. Could you comment on the fact, can a riparian buffer of as little as 35 feet adequately engineered? I've read articles where it says it can stop up to 80% of phosphates from entering the streams. That seems like a rather low threshold for us to have projects like that. And what would you estimate? It seems to me that driving around the county, we've lost a lot of land where people have stripped out sections along along rivers and streams that enter the lake. And if in fact it is 80%, why aren't we doing more of that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So with development in recent years and decades, there has certainly been a reduction in forested stream buffers. And I think one of the great challenges there is producers are looking to make the most out of their land, right? And maximizing yield for them can include expanding those farm fields, right? And so those farm fields have been expanded to such a point that they're really moving in to those stream corridors. I agree that they're important. I would love to see even just a managed retreat from the stream corridors, if not a managed buffer. I think the farmers are more so looking for, those who'd be interested in this particular practice, a managed buffer, right? Something that they can control and perhaps even utilize in some way. But I would say what I mean by managed retreat from the streams is there's of course natural recruitment, right? Where the vegetation will of course find its way and help stabilize those soils along the stream banks. So it's a very important pursuit, but I think trying to advance that particular practice is difficult in the face of farmers who are looking to maximize their yields, and certainly in a difficult economy, right, where prices are becoming more expensive, and they're really trying to make the most of the land that they own. Reimburse them. I mean, I think so. What? Then later.
Fix the lake in 100 years. So it would seem to me that rather than do studies, why don't we start paying farmers to back off 15 feet, 35 feet on each side of the stream?
I mean, I think that's a fine recommendation there, right? I mean, the financial incentive, right? If farmers are going to be expected to pull lands out of production, how would they be compensated, right? The bottom line is the bottom dollar. So adequately financially compensating them, I gather that would help support the advancement of that particular practice.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Dana.
So we are almost to the end of this year's Bob Brower Memorial Symposium, but we're not quite done. I want to ask for a round of applause, please. Thank you to Ann Robson, who shouldered much of the load, despite a full-time job and other obligations, shouldered much of the load of planning and making sure that this symposium came off as well, I hope you'll agree, as it did today. So a round of applause for Ann, please. Secondly, we're getting closer to closing here, folks, but as you've experienced both online or in person here in the APT this morning, this symposium, we intend to continue to remember Bob Brower in another symposium next year. So while this is still fresh in your mind, if there are places we could do better, do differently, please send us an email, make a note on a piece of paper. For example, we did not provide you an intermission this year as we have in past years, and so maybe that's a mistake, maybe that was beneficial. But we were able to pack more information into the hours that we had your attention. Anyone have any remaining questions, or if not, I'll call the symposium to close, adjourned, I guess. Yes, please.
I just would like to recognize that we have Senator Rachel May here with us today, and she might have something to share with the group.
Senator, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. And I know people want to go and have lunch. Just to say, we're in the middle of doing the budget this year. We're fighting really hard to make sure that there is continued funding for a lot of the projects that Adam was talking about. I am also working really hard. I'm engaged in a real fight with the Attorney General and the DEC about land trust acquisitions, because the title transfer for land trust takes forever in New York, way longer than any other state, and so the land trust gets stuck with, they've committed all the money for the purchase, but they can't get their money back because they can't get the transfer to happen. It's way slowed down the acquisition of some of these lands. So that's a fight that I'm in the middle of. I just want you to know we're doing our best to try to make sure that we can make those things happen. And we're trying to get into the budget some money for HAB monitoring and just whatever we can do to attack them. So I just want you to know I'm here. I love to talk to people if you have specific things that you want to talk to me about, or things that you want me to try to get in the budget. It's kind of at the tail end here, so there's not a lot new, but there are certainly things on the table that I can fight for if they matter to you. So please let me know. And thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Senator May. I'm being reminded that if you are not, shame on you, if you're not a member of the Owasco Watershed Lake Association of AWLA, the organization that, for example, put together this forum this morning, this symposium, but does lots of other good things all around the watershed. If you're not a member of AWLA, please become so. And paperwork, very simple, cost very, very low, annual cost is at the registration table out in the foyer. Okay, anything else? Then thank you everyone for attending online and in person, and have a good rest of your weekend.